Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had Apollo quirk part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see part 2, comment down below and let me know. Before I start, please do support for more awesome content and leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story TheHinokami from Wattpad. So let's start the video. Third POV. The child cursed and blessed by the heavens, is what they all would say, and many would agree with this sentiment when they would first think of the hero known as Apollo. There were many reasons for this line of thinking once they heard the life of the famous hero, but they also knew that the pillar that they all relied on nowadays doesn't let his past stop him or his team of heroes from moving forward towards a brighter future. No, the hero of Radiance used his past to fuel his determination for training and his sprint towards his dreams once he became a free man. He also used his past to fuel the destruction of the demons that hunted him before and allowed him to save others from the hands of evil that created his initial fate, as he refused to allow others to come to harm like he did at the villainous hands of those men. This is the story of how a young child known as Izuku Midoriya was blessed by the great heavens to go on to be the greatest hero of all time. But to be blessed by the heavens also means that one must also suffer at the hands of the heavens as well. This is because one does not get blessed without also being cursed by the heavens in the form of tribulations that would befall an individual blessed by the heavens. Only by overcoming the tribulations of the heavens can one push forward to greatness, and the first tribulation that Izuku Midoriya must face is the tribulation of being declared quirkless. Now some may be confused on how this was the first tribulation that Izuku Midoriya would go through, but let's look back a bit at the finer details of the situation that Izuku now finds himself in currently. Izuku Midoriya was 4 years old when the tribulation has first begun for him, and he had yet to present a quirk like everyone else was doing around his age. Now, in some worlds that would be fine, but in this world, or at least in the country of Japan, this was a large issue, as Japan was one of the first countries for quirks to ever appear in, which changes things a bit. The reason this changes things is because Japan had a large number of quirk marriages once quirks started to appear and be accepted in Japan. This large number of quirk marriages meant that in an unnormal world that quirks became the standard feature of the vast majority of their citizens. Later on, a person who was declared quirkless like Izuku Midoriya was now the freak or unnormal one in such a world that seemed like it came out of a comic book. Other countries have slightly higher quirkless populations, but even for them, the number of quirkless tends to be in the older generations instead of the younger ones. These other countries also tend to have a slightly higher percentage of quirkless people in their younger generations due to the fact that they allowed quirks to progress a bit more naturally instead of having massed amounts of quirk marriages, which increased the speed of the quirk gene spreading. The biggest difference truly stems from how countries adapted to the appearance of quirks and how fast their country became quirked instead of having a majority of their population being quirkless. As such, countries that allowed quirks to spread naturally had quirkless people around for a much longer time, which resulted in these countries having better views than slowly adapted to modern times. As such, they didn't become heavily quirkless countries due to how fast the quirkless diminished in countries like Japan. Now let's shift back to the main focus at hand, which is Izuku Midoriya. Both he and his mother had long left the doctor's office where Izuku had been declared quirkless, and they had his results in hand when they arrived home. Of course, for a child such as Izuku Midoriya, the news of being declared quirkless was truly devastating to the mind of someone so young, since he always dreamed of being a hero. But then it was made worse in the end, because when they were at home, Izuku turned around in his chair and wished for hope from his mother as he asked her, "Can I be a hero too?" He said in a low tone for a devastated child, but the answer he was given was not one filled with hope or reassurance. No, it was filled with regret and sadness, as Izuku Midoriya could only hug her child and apologize to him non-stop, as there was nothing she could do, as she knew how much he wanted to be a hero, but in her mind, a quirkless child wouldn't be able to do it in their quirked world. There was simply too much of a difference in power, and she didn't want her child to die, so she only apologized to him as much as she could. This all happened with the sound of All Might's voice going off in the background as Izuku had the debut of All Might playing on repeat. "So, have no fear, for I am here," could be heard from the computer, which seemed to only make the situation worse and even more depressing in the young child life, because he wanted to be a hero like All Might, but everything was currently against him. Even though he never was given hope by his mother, Izuku Midoriya still loved her greatly, but he wasn't going to give up just yet. In his young mind he believed there had to be some way for him to obtain his dreams, and he was right, but unfortunately for him, He didn't know that it would come at such a large cost in the future that he would debate if everything was worth it or not, but for now he remains unaware of what would come. No, right now Izuku Midoriya knew it could be worse off because he knew he had his mother, he had his aunt Mitsuki, his uncle Masaru, and even his little cousin 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃 was born recently as he was 3 years younger than Izuku, who enjoyed spending time with the fierce child who was still just a little baby, but it was clear he was inheriting a personality like his mother. However, all good things seem to come to an early end for Izuku Midoriya, and that seems to be a trend in his young life that even he himself realized. The reason this is said is because of the fact that as Izuku grew older and older he would learn that life was crueler than it had let on. He knew he had gained a large setback at the young age of 4 when he was declared quirkless, but people were cruel to even through own kind, as many people would be rude or mean to Izuku Midoriya. Sadly, that now included little children like his cousin 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃, who learned to be cruel as well to those that were meant to be family like Izuku had meant to be, but that didn't seem to register in the young Bakugo's mind anymore. The reason this can be said is that we can see it in how at the young age of 5 years old, 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃 ended up saying something that he would later come to regret, as it would haunt his young mind for years until he could find forgiveness, even though it was something said as a young child, but he was denied the chance to ever apologize for it. One afternoon when both of the families were out at a park, young 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃 ended up repeating what he had learned in school from his teachers. These things were the fact that a person like Izuku shouldn't be around someone like Bakugo, who has an amazing heroic quirk, which was explosions. Though 𝗧𝗍𝗃 wasn't done speaking yet either, as he went on to say more things just as his teachers had taught him to say, and even though Izuku knew that his little cousin was being corrupted by these teachers, it still hurt to hear the next set of words the most. 𝗧𝗍𝗃 then said that quirkless people shouldn't be in our society anymore, as quirkless people are just a drain on our society. 𝗧𝗍𝗃 said, and in very short words that were hidden in that message, 𝗧𝗍𝗃 basically told Izuku that he should die. Now, Izuku of course knew that this wasn't his cousin's true feelings, since he knew his aunt and uncle never taught their son to be like that, but he also knew he just heard it out of 𝗧𝗍𝗃's mouth, which still hurt a lot since it was his face and mouth saying it, just like the teachers at the school would always say in hidden meanings to him each day. Now you might wonder what Izuku meant by this, and it was kind of straightforward in how he meant it. As his classmates at school found out he was quirkless, Izuku started to be bullied and separated from others children his age, which meant that 𝗧𝗍𝗃 was really the only other child that was ever nice to Izuku. This is because the teachers would encourage the actions of the other children at school and would say that Izuku was just too weak, or it was an excuse like boys will be boys whenever Izuku had a larger injury. Of course, 𝗧𝗍𝗃, being so young, truly didn't understand the implications of what was said, but it was still said by the time their parents had arrived to stop 𝗧𝗍𝗃 from talking anymore. 𝗧𝗍𝗃's parents scolded their child and apologized to Izuku, as 𝗧𝗍𝗃 was just downright confused about what he had done wrong. In his young mind, he was only repeating and doing what the teachers at his school told him to do, and Izuku could never blame him for that. The teachers were meant to correctly teach him, but when it came to a quirkless child, it always seems that the teachers stopped seeing Izuku as a human being as well. After apologizing to Izuku's mother, it was decided that it would be good to end the day there, as his aunt and uncle needed to have a more thorough talk with their child and plan to deal with the teachers. After everyone went their separate ways back to their individual homes for the night, it was unknown by everyone that night that 𝗧𝗍𝗃 would never get the chance to apologize until many years later. The reason for this would be due to the fact that later that night the Bakugos would be awakened and disturbed by the loud sounds of the first responders' sirens going through the streets and headed down the block. Mitsuki decided to go take a look since she had a bad feeling, and their young child of course wanted to get out to see the first responders' vehicles, so he was brought with them, but in all honesty they would regret every stepping out that night, as they were faced with the harsh reality that would be thrown into their faces that night. As they walked out of their house and headed down the street, they realized there was an orange glow on the horizon that was nearby, and smoke was rising into the air. It seems a house or some building was on fire, and this nagged at Mitsuki because the direction it was coming from would be directly where the Midoriya's apartment complex would be located at. Slowly but surely they arrived at the police line for the first responders to find the very exact complex that the Midoriyas lived in on fire. Mitsuki was devastated as she looked around to try and find Inko and even tried to call her, but sadly no answer ever came. The first responders and rescue pro heroes worked on the fire all night long, but the Bakugos would not get an answer until the very next day, which kept them up all night long. It was declared that the Midoriyas were missing, and information came out that the fire had started with their individual apartment as well. A call to the emergency line had been placed a few minutes after a scream was heard from the Midoriya's apartment in the complex by people around the room, but by the time police and others arrived, the building was already on fire. The reason the Midoriyas was declared missing instead of being declared dead is due to the fact that when it was investigated inside of their apartment, there were no actual bodies of the older Midoriya or the younger one, which meant that they were either never in the building or were taken away from the building before the fire engulfed the building. As such, the sight of the fire consuming the building would be another haunting memory for the young Katsuki Bakugo that he would have to live with, as he never got to say the words, "I'm sorry," to his older cousin Izuku Midoriya that was now missing. Though unknown to all of them, of course, the heavens work in strange ways, as the next tribulation for Izuku Midoriya had now started for Izuku, but unlike him being declared just quirkless and it directly affecting him, this tribulation would have long-lasting effects and have an impact on his mother Inko Midoriya as well. The reason this was going to have an impact on more than just Izuku Midoriya is due to the fact that the villain known as Dragon, who was wanted international, had decided to invade the home of the Midoriyas and took them both for his goals. Now, the Midoriyas actually knew of the true name for the wanted man, and it was none other than Hisashi Midoriya, who had invaded their home that night and decided to take both of the other Midoriyas. As such, we now begin the next tribulation for Izuku Midoriya, and it would be a costly one for the young child, but can he survive and push forward is the question in the end. But again, this is the story of the child blessed by the heavens but also cursed by heavens as well, which meant that everything he faces will be far more difficult to deal with than what other people will typically deal with. Third POV, Izuku groaned when he came to, but he was still startled to find himself in a cage, as he couldn't remember at that moment how he ended up in a cage in a dark room that had limited light. As he became more and more aware of where he was at, his mind became clearer for him to think, so he decided to try and free himself from the cage, but sadly this was tribulation from the heavens for the young child, and tribulation is never easy to get through. Now that being said, as Izuku reached forward in the limited amount of light, he found the hole where a key would go into, and he knew he would have trouble figuring a way to get out of this cage, but all of this sudden movement and trying to mess with the cage gate created noise, and this noise alerted his captor, who he didn't remember about at that current moment. As Izuku was focused solely on trying to figure a way to get himself out of the cage, a man wearing all black got up and close to the cage and landed a solid kick against the side of the cage, which caused it to move around a bit, which startled Izuku. As Izuku became startled due to the sudden loud kick against the side of the cage, Izuku was startled backward, which resulted in his young 8-year-old head slamming against the back of the cage, causing him to hurt his head. After hitting his head against the back of the cage, Izuku cried out in pain, which caused the man in black to lean down, which allowed the light to hit their face just good enough to reveal themselves to Izuku. The face that was revealed to Izuku belonged to none other than Hisashi Midoriya. "Don't try to escape, you useless child, otherwise I'll punish your mother in your stead, because she already made a large mistake in giving BRTH to a quirkless child in the first place, so she can go ahead and take the beatings for you, since you will be sold soon, which means you can't be damaged," Hisashi Midoriya said with a grin on his face. It was now at this moment in time that the memories from before started to come rushing back to Izuku and made him remember what truly happened to put him in such a place. Flashback: as Izuku and Inko left the park and started to head towards their apartment, you could hear the little sniffles from Izuku as he cried a bit at what was said to him, even though he knew that his little cousin most likely didn't mean the things he said, and it was just put in his mind by the adults at the school. Soon they arrived at their apartment, and Inko always knew the ways to cheer Izuku back up whenever he was sad, as Izuku always loved to eat some 𝗬𝗏 that was made from scratch by his mother. As such, she sat him down in front of the TV while it played some All Might cartoons, and she got to work to quickly make the meal. After about half an hour the food was done and they were sitting down to eat the food to help fix Izuku's chaotic heart. Inko though wanted to reassure her son as she spoke, "Sweetie, it may seem like he meant that, but I truly doubt he meant it. Your aunt and uncle would never teach him stuff like that, and I am sure they will get that nonsense that his teachers at the school filled his mind with and get it out of his system." "Okay, dear," Inko said and asked him, and Izuku nodded his head, as he of course knew that Katsuki wouldn't truly be like that because he's never acted like that before, and it was such a drastic change that came out of nowhere. Soon the night moved forward and Izuku was placed in bed by Inko that night, but the night was not going to come to a calm ending. As Izuku was starting to fall asleep, he heard an awful scream that he knew came from his mother, which worried him about if she fell or something, so he decided to get out of bed to check on her. Entering the living room, he looked around the apartment complex and soon found his mother, but he found someone else in the apartment as well, which confused him since it had been a long time since he had last seen this individual. This individual was none other than 𝗧𝗵𝗃 Midoriya, who was now standing over 𝗵𝗃 Midoriya, but something was wrong that Izuku didn't truly understand due to him being so young, as his mother looked terrified for some reason. In Izuku's young mind, he didn't understand why his mother would be scared of his father since he was married to his mother, so in his young mind he did the only thing he knew to do, and that was to call out for his father. "Dad!" Izuku said as he called out for the man, not knowing any better, and both of the heads of the adults snapped right away to the sound of his voice. After finding the source of the voice and knowing it belonged to his son, 𝗧𝗵𝗃 Midoriya smirked as he made eye contact with Izuku, but for some reason, this smirk did not make Izuku happy. No, it made his blood run cold for some unknown reason, but he would soon find out why this was as 𝗧𝗃 spoke up. "Well, if it isn't my useless child that this beach, you're going to end up being my next meal ticket for a long time, you know that, brat. There is a group that is looking for young children, but they are also interested in quirkless children as well, so what better use do you have for me outside of that, brat, since you useless all of the other time?" 𝗧𝗃 said as he moved towards Izuku, who tried to back away as he knew deep down that he needed to get away, but even then his mother was yelling for him to run as well. However, for a boy as young as Izuku, he had no hopes of ever fighting against 𝗧𝗃. There was a complete difference in the size of the two of them, which meant that 𝗧𝗃 was able to easily subdue Izuku without much of a fight, or really any fight at all. As such, the last thing that Izuku heard that night before he blacked out fully was the sound of his mother screaming out for him one more time. After that, he blacked out for good, and the next thing he knew, he woke up here in this cage. Flashback, and now that everything had come back to Izuku, he remembered why the man in front of him had returned and what he had done to Izuku and his mother, which made him only more scared, as this was his so-called father who was meant to love him. Even though Izuku was downright terrified of the man that was currently standing right in front of him, he was still a mother's boy, which could be seen by the fact that he mustered the little courage that he had to ask where his mother was at, since he was concerned about her, as the last thing he heard was her screaming out for him. However, instead of getting a verbal response, Izuku received a physical response as 𝗧𝗃 Midoriya lifted his finger up and pointed towards another cage in the room that Izuku hadn't noticed in his young child mind, as he was more focused on trying to get out of the said cage and not looking around the entire room like an adult might do to understand where they were fully located at. Inside of the other cage that was near him was none other than his mother, 𝗵𝗃 Midoriya. Izuku Midoriya tried to call out for his mother by screaming out for her, but no matter how much he screamed for her, she wouldn't answer him, which only made him scream out more and more to try and get her to respond, because any response was better than none at all in his young mind. 𝗧𝗃 though only looked on in amusement at what was going on, and he continued to do so for several minutes until he finally got tired of hearing all of the screamings that Izuku was doing. At this point in time, 𝗧𝗃 stood up as he kicked the cage and yelled for Izuku to stop his screaming, as it wasn't going to work. "She's still under the effects of the drag that she was given, you brat, so stop your yelling now, as it has lost its amusement factor for me. I would rather not want to damage the goods I am about to sell, so do as I tell you," 𝗧𝗃 said as he reminded Izuku of the fact of why he was taken away from his home and the coming fate for him, which made him pale a bit at hearing this information once again. 𝗧𝗃 soon left the room, and this meant that 𝗵𝗃 and Izuku were now alone, as Izuku noticed that no one else was currently in the room, as it had no windows and only minimum light from a light source above them that barely did anything for a room of this size. As Izuku sat there in the room in silence, he worried about his future, he worried about his mother, and he worried about ever seeing the Bakugos once again. However, after about minutes of waiting in the room in quiet, he noticed that his mother 𝗵𝗃 had finally started to store awake, but was having a bit of trouble due to being sluggish due to the drag still having a small effect on her. As she started to wake up, Izuku spoke up and started to call out for her once again, which his screaming voice made her push through the remaining drag effects, as she knew her son was in danger, which empowered her to get through the drags the best she could. 𝗵𝗃 was awake enough that she could now call out to her son as she called his name, "Izuku," she yelled out and tried to reach for her son but was unable to do so. The reason this happened was due to the fact that she was in a cage as well, which she now noticed, but also due to the fact that, unlike Izuku, who was quirkless and was a young child, she had chains and anti-quirk cuffs on her arms to stop her from using her quirk, which would have been pretty good to use in an escape attempt, as she could likely steal the keys or break small things like a lock on a cage if she had her quirk. After a bit of time, which felt like days but in reality had only been several hours, 𝗧𝗃 had returned to the room. This meant that whatever fate had in store for them now was soon to come and be decided, as 𝗧𝗃 looked around at both of them with a small smirk on his face as he was enjoying the sight before him. "Alright, it's time for the auction to start going on, and it will be your turn soon, you useless child," 𝗧𝗃 said as he vanished again, and reality fell upon them once again, but neither of them noticed the wording that 𝗧𝗃 used, as he only ever mentioned Izuku being sold and not 𝗵𝗃, but again neither of them realized what he had said due to the situation they were in and both of them being scared. After a while more it was now their turn, as 𝗧𝗃 returned with a much wider grin on his face, but soon they were interrupted as 𝗵𝗃 wanted to know what had happened to her loving husband that she knew in the past, but sadly the answer truly would fit a monster like 𝗧𝗃. 𝗧𝗃 chuckled as he looked at her as the cages started to be lifted by some guards and they began their trip. 𝗧𝗃 revealed the fact that he had gotten with 𝗵𝗃 for the sole fact of him wanting to create a quirk marriage for a better child based on their quirks, since he wanted a child that could have far better control over flames than he had. As such, Izuku Midoriya was in truth a byproduct of an illegal quirk marriage, which 𝗵𝗃 didn't even realize what the marriage had been, since 𝗧𝗃 had such a perfect act going on the entire time, so she never realized anything. "Outside of that, the only reason I kept supporting you was to keep a cover story up. Otherwise, I would have gotten rid of you both a long time ago, but the luck seems to be on my side, as this auction was looking for young children and they have a value in quirkless children as well. As such, I decided to act and earn me some money as well," 𝗧𝗃 said, shocking them, but their shock didn't last long, as the cages they were stuck in were now placed down on the ground on a stage in front of many people. Izuku could hear many disturbing comments being made by all of the people in the building as they looked him over and treated him as if he was a simple object they were buying in a store, and in their eyes he was truly just an object and not a human. After a bit more chatter, the room went silent as the auctioneer came to the stage and started to speak up, which made them all go quiet. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have had a wide range of products today, and for our last one we have a bit of a special product today. We have a quirkless child at the age of 8 years old who will soon turn 9. The auctioneer said in a loud voice as everyone paid attention. The man spoke and explained how they all knew a young quirkless child was rare nowadays and was extremely good for those wanting to conduct human medical experiments that many wouldn't approve of, and that a quirkless body was a perfect testing ground for a wide range of drugs that might be affected by quirked bodies. Izuku found it ironic that out in the normal world he lived in he was a freak, but here he was seen as a prized object to be tested on. "Either place I don't have human rights," Izuku thought in his young mind, as even though he was a child he understood that as a quirkless person he was not seen as human in the eyes of others. Soon the bidding started off, and the starting bid was $1,000,000, which was around $1,000,000 USD. The auctioneer was calling the bids out, and the bid just kept going up and up as Izuku could only cower in fear as the final bid finally happened, with it being at $1,000,000,000 or $USD. 𝗧𝗃 though wasn't done yet, as the bids came to an end and he had one more thing left to do as a screw you to his old family before Izuku was sent away. 𝗧𝗃 leaned down in front of Izuku's cage and looked at him. "Brat, as your last present for your coming birthday from your old man here, I want you to say goodbye to your mother," 𝗧𝗃 said, as Izuku was confused until he saw what 𝗧𝗃 was doing. 𝗧𝗃 took in a large breath, and soon out of his mouth came a large number of flames that he breathed out and burned 𝗵𝗃 alive. Everyone was expecting to hear her screaming, and even Izuku was waiting for it, but it never came, which shocked everyone, even 𝗧𝗃. The only thing that did come out of 𝗵𝗃 was the final words that she left him with, "I love you Izuku, remember your dream to be a hero," 𝗵𝗃 said in her final moments as she gave reassurance to her son as she passed away due to the fire that 𝗧𝗃 used on her. What no one knew was that this was also the start of the blessings from the heavens for Izuku, as something inside of Izuku snapped at that moment as he witnessed his mother's death. As she passed away, Izuku's eyes started to glow, and what looked like a thin layer of a mist started to fill the stage around Izuku and 𝗵𝗃. All of this mist soon converged upon 𝗵𝗃's body and healed it fully, which shocked everyone as they just witnessed the awakening of a new quirk in a quirkless person. It was a rare quirk, as well as it was none other than a healing quirk. The thing is that this mist was healing energy that Izuku had gathered and applied to his mother's body without him really controlling it, since it was the first time he ever used it. The entire room was still in shock as a guard walked up to her body and checked it to see if she was alive again, but sadly for Izuku, he couldn't bring her back from the dead, as not even he could bring the dead back from the grave even if he could completely heal a body from all mortal wounds. Though this shock soon came to an end by the sound of Hisashi's body dropping like a fly to the floor, which confused everyone until it was discovered that he was dead, as they figured out a bit about how Izuku's quirk worked by the view they could see on the stage. Turns out that Izuku's quirk can pull the life energy from any life source and use it to heal wounds if he chooses to do so, as they could see that all of the plant life that was near him on the stage due to decorations that the trafficking ring had set up to look fancy were now all dead. It was also concluded that Izuku used Hisashi's energy as well, since the man was inside of the zone for Izuku to pull from, as it was a clear circle that they could see from the dead plants compared to the alive plants, which were about feet on all sides of him for the range of where he pulled the energy from. This new information caused everyone to ask for the bidding to be redone, since the object they were bidding on had changed from the originally proposed bid, but this was shut down quickly by the winner of the bid as everyone realized who it was. The winner of the bid was none other than a high-level villain from America that was known by the villain name of Rage. Now, Rage normally wouldn't get high on a top villain list under normal cases, but once his quirk was taken into account with the things he had done, it made him a dangerous man, as his quirk was called Rage Trigger, which even the drag called Trigger was based on his quirk. Rage's quirk allowed him to boost himself depending on how angry he was, but another feature of this quirk was that it allowed him to boost himself off the anger of others as well in a range around him, which was a powerful factor of his quirk, as he could make himself nearly unstoppable if he was in a dense area filled with people that were angry with him, which was easy to make happen as the man was a villain that attacked others, which causes people to be automatically angry with him. His quirk did have some drawbacks, of course, such as the fact that he could only boost off his own anger or anger from others, but never in combination. It was also the fact that if he used the anger of others, it would compact onto each other and made him go into a berserk-like stage with less critical thinking skills due to anger making people blind in their actions sometimes. As such, Rage would often get injured, often due to going into this state to fight high-level heroes, but now he had just acquired a rare healing quirk instead of a quirkless child like he had thought. If the bidding had happened again, then Izuku would go for a far higher rate due to the rare number of healing quirks in the world. Even when he was bidding on Izuku, he had a purpose, and it was the fact that he liked to have people he could easily overpower under his control, as they would not require him to use the anger of those around him, which causes him to get a bit blinded in his actions, and a quirkless child would fit perfectly in his servants, but a person with a healing quirk was far more needed, as he could go into his blind state more often, and win battles now, but not require longer healing times that the other healers that he had or those in the underworld took to heal his wounds. As such, he would be a far more deadly villain moving forward with Izuku under his control. Soon Rage walked down the stage and made his way to Izuku, as no one tried to oppose him keeping his original bid anymore. As he arrived at Izuku, he quickly knocked Izuku out, as he knew Izuku was dangerous as well, since with just a wave of his hand, if he could control his quirk, could mean death to him and many others once the quirk was trained. As such, Rage knew not to underestimate the boy in front of him that was now knocked out. Though Rage knew he had a way to keep Izuku under control with a method called mutual destruction, as he had no method to force his will completely, he could at least control Izuku enough to not allow Izuku to escape from his grasp, as everything else would come with time and some strong work on Rage's part to keep Izuku in line. This though was the end of the auction, and now the start of the next tribulation for Izuku, but also the start of the first blessing he would receive by the heavens, which was a quirk, but at a cost which he had now started to pay greatly for. As the saying goes, better be careful of what you wish for. Third POV, Rage had knocked Izuku out pretty well, considering the fact that Izuku had not wakened up during the entire trip that had happened, especially considering the fact that trafficking of a human is not a quiet task like you would think it would be. There is also the fact that you can't just transport a missing individual through an airport, because of the fact that the said individual you were transporting would need to be verified by the security before an individual would be allowed to get on the said airplane, but even a private plane would have its own challenges. For example, using a private plane would still require the trafficked human to go through a customs gate, and an unconscious child like Izuku Midoriya would without a doubt raise some good questions and red flags if the people were doing their jobs at the customs gate for leaving the country. As such, Traveling via the air is out of the option, which means that transporting illegal goods or kidnapped individuals such as Izuku is far easier to do by transport on a boat, as it's far easier to pay off a handful of crew members on a large cargo ship or a passenger ship where they could help hide the said individuals, as hiding on a large vessel is far easier to do than a plane. Now Rage would like to be quick about getting back to the United States of America where his organization was located at, but he did not want to risk losing Izuku, since Izuku had such a powerful healing quirk and it was extremely rare to get a healing quirk in the underground world, as governments tended to protect those with healing quirks. But even then, a person with such a powerful healing quirk like Izuku was far more of a rare jewel than any other quirk really. Though Rage did hope that all of the noise from the docks and crew members would not wake up Izuku, as he did not have the device needed to help keep Izuku in line currently, since he didn't plan or know that he would acquire such a rare individual like Izuku at this auction. Though Rage seemed to be really lucky lately, as Izuku never woke up during the entire trip and they were able to successfully arrive back in America where Rage operated from. Though Rage did have a bit of concern about the fact that Izuku hasn't woken up yet, even though they were back in America already, since he had paid so much money to acquire Izuku, but then he did remember the fact that Izuku had just witnessed the death of his mother at the hands of his father right after being sold off himself. This is also added to the fact that Izuku had awakened a brand new quirk which resulted in the death of his 𝗬𝗧𝗟𝗘 of a father at his hands and failed attempt to review his mother, so being knocked out by Rage most likely sent his body into a deep sleep that it's using as a way to recover from all of the trauma and shock that had just been dumped onto the young child in a short period of time. This fact did help Rage calm down a bit, since he had invested so much in Izuku and of course, didn't want to lose his investment, but more importantly, he didn't want to lose such a rare healing quirk so quickly. Then again, it all worked out well for Rage in the end, as they were able to fully get back to Rage's compound in the outskirts of New York City, New York. Once they were inside the secured compound and had dealt with the initial things that he needed to do with his return, he ordered the doctors that he had acquired in the underground to start working on Izuku and ensure his overall health, due to the fact that Izuku hadn't eaten for days since he had been knocked out cold. They were also ordered to start preparing the pulse bomb that would be placed inside of Izuku, and for anyone that doesn't know what a pulse bomb is a small explosive device that is injected into the human body around someone's heart, so that if it is triggered then it could explode, which would destroy the injected host's heart, resulting in their death. The device is also powered by the natural electrical currents that run in the human body when the heart beats, which allows for the device to be pretty small, as it doesn't need an internal battery supply which would run out naturally if it was implanted in the body with no way of recharging. As such, feeding off the human body's natural electrical current allows the device to not be removed to replace a battery and stay active at all times, which allows the individual with the trigger to control the said individual, since they could trigger the bomb whenever they wanted if they were in range. As such, the doctors got to work after receiving their orders and soon had the device prepared, as well as checked Izuku's overall health conditions, since it was stated that he needed to be fit for training in the future, as Rage had many plans for what Izuku would be used for, and he was going to get his money's worth out of what he paid to acquire Izuku. And who could blame the villain for wanting to get what he paid for out of Izuku? Well, Izuku could blame him, since he was trafficked, but that newly injected bomb in his chest makes complaining about such things a bit complex for him to do so. Another few days passed by when Izuku Midoriya finally woke up from the long sleep that the stress had placed him into once he had got knocked out. As such, when Izuku woke up in the medical wing of the compound, the doctors got right to work on checking him over again, and one doctor right away went and alerted Rage of the fact that Izuku had finally woken up. Rage was thrilled with the information that his prized possession was now awake, which pleased him greatly, since he has been dying of boredom to get his time to start talking to Izuku and getting things rolling with what he wanted to do. He also knew he would need to actually figure a way out to control Izuku Midoriya due to the powerful quirk that is in Izuku's control. Rage knew that his usual methods wouldn't really work in controlling Izuku, as they would only work up to a point before Izuku decided to lash out with a quirk that could kill Rage. As Izuku gets older and older with time, he would become more and more experienced due to the training that Rage plans to put him through, so he would become more and more dangerous towards Rage himself, but that was a risk he wanted to take. The reason that Rage was willing to take the risks is due to the fact that the healing quirk that Izuku had was so powerful that it would allow Rage to push his limits in his quirk control and the operations that he did, as long as he provided Izuku enough fuel sources to use for healing. An example of how powerful Izuku was currently is the fact that no one truly noticed when Izuku had drained Hisashi of his life energy at the auction, as it had happened so quickly. As such, with more and more control and training, Rage believed that Izuku could possibly get around the pulse bomb itself if it went off, since Izuku could possibly heal the damage as it happened or quicker than him dying out to do how powerful his quirk could grow. As such, Rage knew he needed to build fear plus loyalty into Izuku to ensure that he didn't run away or attempt to test his chances at overcoming the pulse bomb. As long as Izuku had some doubts about overcoming the bomb, then Rage could most likely control Izuku for the rest of his life, which would be ideal for Rage. After Rage had finished getting an update on Izuku's health from the information that the doctors had sent over to him, he headed over to the medical wing to find Izuku Midoriya now dressed in the new clothing that Rage had prepared in advance before he woke up. Izuku was now wearing some clothing that was more of an athletic type clothing that would be seen if you were going to be training or working out in. As Rage was thinking, he was soon knocked out of his thoughts as a doctor pushed Izuku right in front of Rage, and the man could already see a lot of fear in Izuku's eye, which was normal for someone in Izuku's situation since he had been sold off to. As Rage was thinking, he was soon knocked out of his thoughts as a doctor pushed Izuku right in front of Rage, and the man could already see a lot of fear in Izuku's eye, which was normal for someone in Izuku's situation since he had been sold off to Rage just recently, so fear was expected. Soon Rage spoke up and started to talk to Izuku, but realized that Izuku most likely had no clue on what he was saying since he was speaking in English, since they were back in America and not Japan anymore. As Rage stopped talking, he was able to 𝗧𝗵𝗃 over to Japanese since he realized most kids Izuku's age wouldn't know English yet in Japan, but he was surprised a bit when Izuku stuttered out a response to what he had been saying, which meant that Izuku had fully understood what he had been saying when he spoke in English. Rage had asked how he understood, and Izuku told him that I learned to read, write, and speak mostly English due to Hisashi when he first left on his so-called business trips. It was in the event that we ever went to visited him or needed to move to America with him. Izuku said as he stuttered out his answer in English, which made Rage happy since it was one less thing Izuku had needed to learn to adapt to America quickly. Soon though, Rage told Izuku to follow him as Rage started to show Izuku around the entire compound as he wanted Izuku to get familiar with the place as soon as possible, since Rage intended to get Izuku to work as soon as possible and to start getting his plans in motion for everything else. As such, Izuku followed right behind Rage as the man started to show off the entire compounds, and Izuku did his best to remember how to get around the place as Rage told him it would be important to remember everything for later on, and Izuku knew he really had no choice but to do as he was told. The house itself was in a style of an old castle, and they had trees on all sides of them, but the thing that had Izuku currently as they were doing this so-called tour of the compound building was that Izuku was downright confused, since this was the house itself was in a style of an old castle and they had trees on all sides of them, but the thing that had Izuku currently as they were doing this so-called tour of the compound building was that Izuku was downright confused, since this was not how he had imagined this entire situation would be going. Izuku had figured that he would wake up in a cell or a cage, but instead, he was in a medical room where he was checked over for his health and given food and new clothing. Now the villain that had bought him was taking him on a tour of the place and showing him everything in the entire building, from where the control room was at and even the gun room was at, which shocked Izuku. Izuku decided to open his mouth and asked what the man in front of him wanted with him, since nothing was making sense, and this caused Rage to come to a sudden stop. Izuku wondered if opening his mouth was a mistake when Rage turned around slightly and looked at Izuku W with a smirk as he spoke, "What I want from you. At first, I wanted a servant to serve me, but one that couldn't fight back or oppose me, but then you awoke your quirk at your mother's death." The reminder of that detail made Izuku's face pale a bit, as he didn't want to be reminded nor deal with the fact that his mother had died for his quirk to awaken, so tears were pooling at the side of his eyes currently now. "But now I plan to train you to fight and be an expert in the medical field, so you can use your quirk to the best that you can do, so that you can aid me in my operations," Rage said as he looked at Izuku before moving forward and just leaving Izuku even more confused at the fact that the man would train him to be stronger. Rage though just continued on with the tour and had Izuku continue to follow him around the complex as he learned more and more of the building and the fact that the complex was actually just on the edge of the city, with a train station only being a few blocks away, even though they had a forest around the entire building. Though as if he could read Izuku's thoughts and mind, Rage stopped in front of a door and looked at Izuku with a deep frown on his face as he grabbed Izuku by the shoulders and leaned down to speak. Izuku thought he had done something wrong and was about to be hurt, but then Rage spoke, I know you are likely thinking about escaping into the city due to the fact that we are so close to it and the train station being near and all, but you can't ever escape my grasp, Izuku. Rage said as he looked at Izuku in the eyes, which just confused Izuku, and Rage could see this. Rage stood up and explained the details of why Izuku couldn't escape, and Izuku was downright horrified about what he was told as he clutched his chest as he learned about the pulse bomb inside of him. He knew that Rage was right and that he couldn't escape unless some miracle happened, and that ate at his insides as he hated the situation he was in, and what little kid wouldn't hate this entire thing. Now, I know you are going to be strong in the future, and even now with a wave of your hand, you could kill me with your quirk if you could figure it out as you did back at the auction. Though you would die as well with me, as me or a high-ranked member in my group would trigger the pulse bomb that is inside of you, which means that it's mutually assured destruction if you tried to kill me or I tried to trigger the bomb in the future, since I am sure you would want to take me with you, which I wouldn't blame you at all, kid, as I would do it if I was in your position. Rage said with a laugh as he looked at Izuku for a second in silence before speaking once again. Rage decided to offer Izuku a deal to help keep Izuku in line, since he knew in the future it was most likely the only thing that would keep Izuku in some form of control outside of the threat of triggering the bomb, but that kind of threat would get old quite quickly and push Izuku to figure a way around the bomb if Rage kept using it as a threat all of the time. As such, the deal was offered to Izuku. I want to offer you a deal, kid. I will give you many privileges and freedom in my group and allow you to do normal things like going to school to learn if you be a good boy and follow orders I give you and don't rebel against me. As such, do we have a deal? Rage said as he leaned down and offered his hand to Izuku, since Rage thought this was the best way to keep Izuku in line, as it was a carrot and stick method. Izuku in his mind though just accepted, as he believed he had no other options but to accept, and in reality, at this moment he had no other options, as he could only accept or be forced to do things without getting some freedom, like he would end the deal, so he accepted Rage's deal, which made the man smile as he opened the door they were standing in front of. What was revealed was a bedroom, and not any typical bedroom but one designed for a kid in mind, as Rage spoke up and said that Izuku would have his own room moving forward. After letting Izuku walk into the room, Rage started to walk away before turning around one more time and speaking. "Oh, Izuku. I just wanted to say one more thing before I go for the day. Happy 9th birthday, kid. Welcome to your new home." Rage said, and then closed the door behind him as he left, which just left a shocked and tearful Izuku alone in the room, who broke down on the bed as he realized that it was indeed his 9th birthday, which set reality in much more, as he had been denying everything that had been happening, but this made him fully accept it. He had lost so much and gained something in return, but in his mind, he wishes he could have his mother back, but he knew that was a birthday wish that was never going to be granted, as he cried out into the sheets on the bed. Third POV. The first night that Izuku had been awake had already come to an end, with him having spent the majority of the night crying, as everything had been brought up anew in his mind with everything that had happened, and he was forced to accept the fact that he was now alone for good without anyone who would truly care for him, as those that did weren't around anymore, nor did he think he would ever get to return to Japan. Sadly, all of these facts caused Izuku to start crying, as he ended up crying himself to sleep that night, so he was quite a bit exhausted when the sun rose in the morning of the next day and a resounding knock came on his bedroom door, as it ended up startling him out of his sleep, which caused him to fall out of the bed. The individual that had knocked on the door decided to open it after hearing the large thud and found Izuku tangled in his sheets on the floor. Izuku though was confused about who the man in the butler suit was, as he didn't remember him from the tour around the compound on the previous day, and he had seen quite a few people the previous day. As such, Izuku decided to ask the man who he was as he got untangled from all of the sheets. "Sorry to be rude, but who are you?" Izuku asked the man, who just chuckled a bit as he seemed to find what Izuku had asked a bit funny. "It's quite alright for you to ask questions, as you are in a unique position here in this family," the man said, which just left Izuku with even more questions than answers in his head. Though it appears the older man was truly willing to answer anything as he had said, because as the man grabbed some clothing out of the closet in Izuku's room, he started to speak and talk to Izuku. "My name is 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗵𝗃, but you can just call me Leon, as we do use our first names here in America, unlike in Japan where you would go by your family name. Now for what I do around here. I am the main butler for the Corona family, which means the Crown family, as we have been around since before the dawn of quirks and are one of the only true pure mafia families left. Indeed, We are not a typical villain organization as we have been doing this long before the tag villain came around, as even All Might failed to crush us during his time in the United States all those years ago," said the butler named Leon as the man finished helping Izuku dress in the clothing that he was given, and the clothing looked similar to the ones that he wore the previous day, as it looked like training clothing once again. Said the butler named Leon as the man finished helping Izuku dress in the clothing that he was given, and the clothing looked similar to the ones that he wore the previous day, as it looked like training clothing once again. "Now let's head to the dining room, as you will need a proper diet to do the training that is going to be coming, as Rage has planned for you, so let's walk and talk, young man," Butler Leon said as he started to guide Izuku out of his bedroom and towards the dining hall. "Now, as I said a little bit ago, you are in a unique position in the family, as I've been informed of your deal with the boss of the family, who you should know by his villain name is Rage. You are more or less granted the right to do as you please in the family as long as you do the training and don't rebel against the family. Then no one can really stop you, as you are free to even order most of the men around as long as it doesn't conflict with the orders they have already received from the boss or one of the executives. Now, of course, this is all due to the deal you have with the boss, and if you did refuse to obey or decided to rebel, then I am sure the boss would restrict your movements and freedom, so please be good and obey the boss," Leon said as they continued to walk, and they soon arrived at a bigger door that was below the main floor of the compound. This door was the entrance to the dining hall. As Leon opened the door, and the sight before Izuku was a bit shocking due to how many members were in the group from what he could see in the entire hall, as it was filled. There was also one main table at the far front of the entire room where Rage himself was sitting, with what appeared to be the executives of the family were also sitting at. As Izuku and Leon stood at the open door, everyone's attention shifted towards them, since most people would already be in the room by the time it was, but Izuku wasn't waken up into a bit later, since Rage wanted everyone gathered before Izuku showed up, so he had Leon get him a bit later than when he normally would have Izuku waking up in the future. As everyone looked at Izuku, Rage stood up and started to speak as he grabbed all of their attentions. "Family, I would like to introduce you all to our newest member, Izuku Midoriya, as all of you will likely be seen by him for medical needs in the future, as Izuku has one of the rarest quirks, an extremely powerful healing quirk that most likely when trained can even regrow limbs as well," Rage said as he announced Izuku's quirk to the entire family that was gathered. The reason he did this was that he wanted everyone in the family to know about Izuku and know why he will be treated differently by the boss of the family, since Izuku is known and will be getting privileges that others wouldn't be right away. Of course, Izuku didn't join willingly, as he was bought from a human trafficking auction, but that was small details in the grand scheme of things right now. After everyone absorbed the new information, Rage called Izuku up to the main table and had him sit down at it with him and the executives of the group, and this was done really like a power move on Rage's part to show in reality that Izuku truly was being placed in a powerful position and was held in high regard with the family leaders, so that other members would know to not offend or be rude to Izuku, or else they would face Rage's wrath. After a few minutes, a plate full of food was placed in front of Izuku, as Rage told Izuku to eat since they would start on his physical training later after they finished eating. Izuku could only nod his head and start to eat, as he knew it was better to be fed well instead of starving while being mistreated, which he was sure was an option if he ended up with some other person that could have bought him. Though as Izuku was eating, he did notice that the food he was eating was different from all of the other plates of food in the dining hall that he could directly see, and as if reading his thoughts, Rage spoke up and answered Izuku's unasked question. "I can see it through your eyes. Your meal is different to help give you enough to start building your body up, since we will be kicking off your training, which means you need enough to burn through," Rage said, and Izuku silently nodded his head to show that he heard what was said. The meal for the entire group lasted about 1 hour before everyone started to break away from the dining hall and stood up to get to work. Izuku had also finished his meal already and was just sitting in his chair as he was waiting on instructions on what he should be doing next, which came a few minutes later when Rage stood up from his chair. "Izuku, come," Rage said as he pushed his chair in and started to walk away from the table, which Izuku just copied and followed right behind the man. Soon they walked through the compound and Izuku found himself outside in the forest behind the compound in a bit of an open area that had a training ground and training equipment spread around the place. Izuku knew this would be where he would likely spend a lot of his time when it came to training, as he looked at Rage as he was about to start speaking. "Each day after breakfast you will meet me here unless you are told otherwise, as we'll start your training with an hour or so each day before you are sent off to school once we enroll you," I plan to enroll you into one of the private academies in New York City since you have a good education will be important when it comes to the medical staff training that will likely start soon. Rage said as he told Izuku to get in the training circle as Rage or others would be teaching Izuku how to fight quirkless since Izuku couldn't always rely on his quirk, and there was also the fact that Izuku had a risk of being attacked by rival villain organizations or other criminals. This was because New York City had a bit high of a crime rate, and in truth, the family did have a hand in part of the crime rate, though they honestly tended to do all of their crime quietly or away from sight. The training started to go off and it consisted mainly of Izuku just getting his butt beaten up due to him having zero previous training, and as this happened Izuku wondered how the government and heroes never put a stop to Rage's mafia family, so he decided to ask how they haven't been stopping since he had a bit of courage in his bones at that moment. Sir, how has your group lasted without the government putting a stop to your operations? Izuku asked in between breaths as he laid on the floor bruised. Rage looked at Izuku and chuckled as he spoke. What, want the heroes to come and save you as they put a stop to me? Rage asked, and Izuku paled a bit at that question because in truth he kind of did hope that the heroes would come and save him, but before Izuku could give in to his fear of being hurt due to his question, Rage spoke again. Don't freak out, brat. I know you want the heroes to save you, and that's normal considering I just recently purchased your butt from an auction, but they can't save you from me. My men are good at leaving no traces of our jobs, and all of the family assets are funded or held via other names/corporations which can't be traced back to us. As such, it isn't easy to get a warrant for our operations since they can't really link much back to me, even though they have me listed for a lot of crimes that I did indeed do in the past, but tracking me down and having enough evidence to hold me for the said crimes we do has been impossible for them so far. Rage said, and that indeed would explain why they don't take the man down and why even All Might failed to put the group out of business since it has been around since the dawn of quirks. If you can't get enough evidence to hold the man, then you can't really arrest him since he would just be on the streets in a short PRD no matter what. Rage informed Izuku that the morning training was completed and that they would have him try his quirk now to heal himself by taking the energy from a tree near them. As such, Rage started to explain the basic ideas of quirk control to Izuku so that he would have some idea of what to be looking for when he searched for the power of his quirk or turning it on. As Rage finished explaining what to try to feel for, Izuku was able to feel inside of himself and felt his quirk, or rather some energy, but that wasn't his quirk but his own life energy itself. The next step was for Izuku to try to feel for the life energy of other living things since he could now feel his own, and at this point, Izuku's eyes started to glow since he was now searching for external life energy that wasn't his own. I can see energy inside of things, Izuku said with his eyes glowing as his vision was now something akin to being layered with his quirk vision on top of his normal vision, as he could see the life energy that floated around people or living things. Rage though reminded Izuku not to try anything funny as he had a bomb in his chest if he did try something. The reason this was said by Rage was that Izuku was currently starting right at Rage himself with his quirk turned on, so Rage was a bit on guard as he knew Izuku could use his quirk to kill him if he truly desired, but Izuku snapped out of his stare and apologized as he turned away and faced a tree now. Izuku then was told by Rage to try and take the energy from the tree and put it with his own energy to try and heal the bruising on his body that he got from the training they had done. Though they soon discovered he could indeed heal himself with the energy he takes from other living things, but it was really slow, which Rage was warned about beforehand by the doctors he employs. The doctors warned Rage that the speed that Izuku showed when he first activated his quirk was likely done by Izuku's subconscious mind, and the fact it was the first time using it most likely made it far more powerful until Izuku can train it up himself with time. As such, currently, as it stood, Izuku could heal his own bruises within 2 minutes before they were completely healed up, but Rage had his theories that this could be quickened, of course, by training Izuku's speed, but also trying to have Izuku learn how to pinpoint where he wants to use the energy at instead of spreading it across the entire body like he was currently doing. Soon though, Rage decided he had seen enough of what he wanted to see for the day and wanted to allow Izuku to keep adjusting to the place and explore the compound more. Now, why is Rage acting so nice towards Izuku, you may ask, and of course it is as Rage explained before, he knew Izuku would be a powerful tool, but it was also a double-edged sword, so Rage planned to keep Izuku in line with the carrot and stick approach. As long as Izuku stayed in line, then he would be treated nicely and rewarded from time to time to make the compound seem like a home to Izuku. But if Izuku ever stepped out of line or tried to rebel, of course, then the stick portion of the Rage's methods would come into play, and Rage would need to remind Izuku of why he was a high-ranked villain in America that lead a group that was ranked as the #1 villain organization in America. This was how Izuku's second official day with the Corona Mafia family came to an end, as he started to explore the compound, as he didn't honestly know what else to do since Rage had no other need for him, so Izuku just complied and explored. Third POV. Several weeks have gone by in the flash of an eye for Izuku Midoriya as he explored the new environment that he was in now, but all of the training that Izuku had been starting to do has helped pass the time as well. Now you may ask, why would Izuku decide to devote far more extra time to doing a training on the side outside of the already pre-planned training, since it would only just speed up the day that Izuku would end up getting used by the boss, Rage, for healing services, or potentially even getting involved in more direct criminal activities that Izuku would hate to be a part of? Well, the reason that Izuku is doing this is that a few days ago, after Izuku's introduction to the family, there was a special ceremony that Izuku went through, as all new members must undergo, and this ceremony was the branding ceremony. During this so-called ceremony, Izuku was required to accept the branding of the family's emblem upon his body, and luckily, due to Izuku's unique position, he was given the choice of where he wanted the said emblem to be placed on his body. The one he would be given was slightly different from the normal members' brands that they received, but this one showed that he was a member of the executives, and honestly, Izuku of course didn't want to have a permanent mark on his body that would always remind him of the fact that he had no true freedom but only an illusion of freedom. In the end, Izuku decided to have the mark placed on his left bicep near his heart for several reasons. 1. Having it on his chest would allow him to hide it by wearing clothing over it, and 2. It would be a reminder to him always that the family controlled him by having a more literal hold of his heart to control him due to having the pulse bomb near his heart. The mark that he was being given looked like this. Overall, getting a tattoo marked onto his bicep did hurt quite a bit for a child at his age, as his skin was a bit more sensitive than an adult's, but the process had finally come to an end overall. Getting a tattoo marked onto his bicep did hurt quite a bit for a child at his age, as his skin was a bit more sensitive than an adult's, but the process had finally come to an end. After the mark was finished and the others left the room since they had witnessed the ceremony being completed, Butler Leon grabbed some medical cloth to wrap around Izuku's chest to cover the mark until it fully healed up, though if Izuku really wanted to, he could just steal some life energy from a tree and speed up the healing, but that wouldn't really make the tattoo dry quicker though in his mind. Though Izuku was in for a talk from the butler, who decided to give Izuku some personal advice that he believed Izuku needed so that Izuku could survive in this new environment that he was in now. As such, Lean sat down and started to talk as he kept covering the mark. Izuku, let me give you some advice that will help you survive the family, the underworld, and even the world itself. Hide your true emotions behind a mask of indifference or even coldness, as there are those in this world that will gladly use your kindness and large heart to manipulate you and take advantage of you without even caring a little bit. As such, perfect your mask and let only those that you love, trust, or care deeply for seeing behind the mask you put up. In this world, strength is what matters the most and is what allows you to decide your own future. Because you were weak, you were taken advantage of and sold by your father. Because you were weak, your mother died. Because you were weak, you had a bomb placed next to your heart. Because you were weak, you have no true freedom. As such, I suggest you take advantage of the resources that are being provided to you and grow stronger so that you never regret another what if because you were weak. Butler Leon said as he stood up and started to leave the room, while he left a shocked and confused Izuku in the room. Izuku didn't know if there was a trap in the so-called advice that the old butler gave him, but it did something for Izuku. It created a spark of determination inside of him because he knew he was weak and wanted his mother back. He wanted to feel the loving hug she gave, even though she wasn't supportive of his dreams, but he knew he wouldn't get her back, no. Instead, he would grow stronger so he could one day have a chance to break free from the so-called family that he is now a part of. Izuku didn't know if that was the intention of the old man, nor did he believe it would be, but regardless of what the butler wanted Izuku to get out of that advice, Izuku knew he would indeed take advantage of anything he could, since he knew he would be here for the long future. This conversation was indeed what triggered Izuku to start going more often to the training grounds, and it made Izuku remember his mother's last words, as well as she told Izuku to remember his dream of being a hero before she passed away. Those were a bit bitter to Izuku since she only encouraged him in the end and never before then, but it still made him happy to hear it from her. But it did remind him that his quirk could be highly lethal if he uses the quirk too much on others. As such, Izuku wanted to train and have a way that wouldn't likely result in him needing to kill people, so he decided to train in weapons such as knives or batons so that one day if he found himself in a fight he wouldn't need to rely heavily on his quirk to win. Though he did remember that becoming a hero would be nearly impossible with the invisible leash that was around his neck due to the pulse bomb being placed in his chest, he still wanted to take advantage of the resources in front of him to better prepare himself for the future. Sadly for Izuku, though, he couldn't spend all of his time training anymore since the boss had the family finish forgiving the new documents that Izuku would need, as they showed that Izuku had been born in Japan but then legally moved to the United States after the death of his mother so he could live with relatives in the United States. Overall, it was a smart story to go with since it was indeed quite similar to the truth outside of some small details like having actual relatives here in the United States and entering the country legally part. The most ironic part of Izuku's situation with the new documents is that they didn't have to forge a lot of the documents due to how quirkish Japan is towards quirkless people. As such, they were able to just pay a lot of money towards some people for the actual legit documents from Japan for Izuku's previous schooling. Anyone that might have noticed in the government of Japan wouldn't care either, since Japan's government still believed Izuku to be quirkless, which meant his case of being missing was really never looked into and his mother's body was discovered with no clues on how she died since Izuku had completely healed her, so there was no evidence of being murdered. As such, 𝗵𝗃 Midoriya's case was closed, but Izuku's case went cold as no police really put effort into the cases of quirkless children due to how quirkish Japan was. As such, Japan made the process a lot quicker and smoother, which Izuku just rolled his eyes at in his mind. Rage did inform Izuku that his quirk was registered as a low-level healing quirk, which would get some attention from others on him but not enough to be concerned about since healing quirks are rare, but if they are low-level ones then the government doesn't really care about them. As such, Izuku was instructed to not show his true abilities and only heal bruises or small wounds of others if for some reason he did so out in public. So having these new documents now meant that Izuku had a government ID and everything else that he would need to start going outside in public, as well as start attending the private academy that Rage had him signed up for, which was one of the best in New York City, New York, but it was also a simple and direct trip on the train. This was so if Izuku decided that he didn't want the driver to take him or pick him up from school, then Izuku could take the public transit. Izuku was still nervous about the whole deal of him being allowed to live a somewhat normal life outside of his obedience to the boss, so Izuku gathered some courage and asked if he was indeed allowed to do those types of things like making friends or hanging out after school. Rage nodded his head and informed Izuku that as long as he alerted the head butler, Leon, then said that as long as Izuku alerted butler Leon, who had the authority to approve of any changes to Izuku's schedule. Rage did say that he would no longer be micromanaging Izuku anymore since he felt Izuku knew to obey and what to do around the compound or who to talk to if he had questions. As such, Izuku was free to do as he pleased, and if Rage had a need for him then either himself or butler Leon would alert him of changes to his schedule that Izuku would need to know about. Izuku of course knew to obey, because if he didn't then his illusion of freedom would be rescinded and things would be far more difficult to manage and plan for his future if the little fake freedom he had was taken away. Rage stood up from his chair and threw a Coke on as he said he would be going out to deal with some operations in another state for about a week, but that he wished Izuku had fun starting his schooling in the coming days, as it was currently the weekend and his first day was scheduled for Monday. Izuku nodded his head and thanked the man in a neutral tone as he'd been practicing since he had started to adapt to not showing his true emotions through. Rage just chuckled. "I see you're starting to adapt to our line of work as you are getting good at hiding your emotions and expressions. Good, as it will serve you well for the underworld," Rage said as he walked out of his office door with Izuku right behind him. Izuku watched Rage walk out the front door and sighed when he was gone as he was driven away. Izuku watched Rage walk out the front door and sighed when he was gone as he was driven away. Izuku decided to just relax his body since school would be starting in the coming days and he wanted to practice his English a bit more since it would be used non-stop in school. Izuku was confident in his English but still wanted to be on the safe side because it would be weird if he ended up to Japanese during class and ended up coming to people. There was also the fact that Izuku didn't want too many questions asked about his current living conditions, as that would be a horrible route that would lead to nothing but trouble. As such, Izuku laid down on his bed and just started to practice his writing, reading, and speaking of English on some packets he had acquired from butler Leon a few days ago. Here we go. I wonder if I can make and keep any friends here without risking their safety with the life I now have. Izuku thought as he worked on his packets, but only time could tell. Third POV, the weekend had quickly passed by and Izuku was somewhat dreading the fact that he would be returning to school, but make no mistake, he doesn't want to stick around in the compound of the Corona family and get involved in things he doesn't want to get involved in, but he was also dreading going to school because he hasn't had any good relations with teachers in his past when he was quirkless. Now Izuku will admit he doesn't think it will be like that here due to the fact that being quirkless is more accepted in the United States, but that doesn't stop bullies from picking on him for his weaker quirk that he has or teachers looking down on him. It's just learned behavior that he has, which he now hides behind the mask he is still perfecting as he goes, and so far he thinks he has been doing a good job since the head butler has been making comments on his progress, so Izuku thinks he can slightly trust the man to be true when it comes to Izuku's position and work in the family, but outside of that Izuku wouldn't trust the old man as far as he could throw him, which is nowhere since he couldn't even lift the old man currently with his strength. Now back to the problem at hand. Izuku was currently dressed in the uniform of the private academy and was standing at the front door of the compound waiting for the driver. Izuku kind of wish he could just take the train, but butler Leon instructed him to ride via the car for the first week or so until he got more familiar with the city so that he didn't end up getting lost, as this will be the first time Izuku will have been allowed to leave the compound, as he now has all of his documents in the event a hero or cop stopped him and questioned him about anything. With the yellow backpack that he had bought to purely spite rage, since Izuku could see the twitch of the eyebrow the day Izuku was given it, Izuku just sat in a chair waiting as he hummed a small tune he remembered from somewhere. Overall, Izuku did like his school uniform since you could take parts of it off if you were getting too hot or put some back on if you were getting too cold, but as Izuku was looking at himself in the mirror across from his seat he heard a slight "C." Overall, Izuku did like his school uniform since you could take parts of it off if you were getting too hot or put some back on if you were getting too cold, but as Izuku was looking at himself in the mirror across from his seat he heard a slight clearing of the throat which came from the driver of the car that Izuku would be taking. The driver alerted Izuku that the car was ready to leave when Izuku was, so Izuku got off the chair and followed the driver outside to the car. As they pulled away from the compound, Izuku did his best to memorize the route that they had taken and the sights around in the event he wanted to go out and explore the city near the compound. After about a minute drive they soon arrived at the private academy that Izuku would now be attending, and Izuku could honestly say it was honestly an interesting style of building, as it was nothing similar to what Izuku was used to in the past in Japan. This building was more dignified looking in the colors and style, as it appeared as if it was indeed on a high level of education than a typical school building back in Japan. It had a wide open area for people to sit outside and enjoy the day, as well as other buildings further back behind the main building that Izuku was informed of by butler Leon that they are used for clubs or other activities that the school puts on. As Izuku was about to get out of the car he realized the driver had already moved around to the other side and was opening the door already, which was quick since Izuku was sure he was only in his thoughts for a few seconds. As Izuku was about to get out of the car he realized the driver had already moved around to the other side and was opening the door already, which was quick since Izuku was sure he was only in his thoughts for a few seconds. Izuku stepped out of the car and felt really out of place, because in all honesty if you didn't know the truth of Izuku's situation then you would mistake him for a child of a rich family or something, but he wasn't. No, he was a captive of a terrifying mafia family that even All Might failed to stamp out during his years in America. Moving on though from such depressing thoughts, the driver handed Izuku a folder of stuff that he needed to hand off to the receptionist that would be at the front desk, because it was the last of the forms that the school would need and a list of who could take Izuku out of school without approval from others. Izuku thanked the driver and moved towards the building as he headed towards what appeared to be the main office location, since only the right side of the building had a main office-looking typeface of a building, so Izuku went into the doors there and soon found the front desk quite easily as he handed the documents off. After a few minutes of waiting the administrative assistant at the front desk printed off Izuku's schedule that he would have for the semester, and luckily for Izuku it was the start of only about a few weeks ago, since the summer break had come to an end and a new school year had started, so Izuku wasn't coming in too late at all. The lady at the front desk told Izuku that a guide would come around in a few minutes to show him around the building and to his first class, so Izuku just needed to sit down on the chair. It only took about minutes of waiting before the tour guide arrived, and it was a teacher or staff person that Izuku didn't exactly know what they did but didn't care, as he only wanted to be shown around the building and to his class. As such, they started off on the tour, and Izuku was shown around the place, but Izuku only really paid attention to the more important places that he would end up going to more often than the other places. These places included the dining hall for lunch, the classrooms, the training facilities for the gym, and a few other places that the tour guide showed. These places included the dining hall for lunch, the classrooms, the training facilities for the gym, and a few other places that the tour guide showed. Overall, Izuku must admit that the American schools are quite different from the schools back in Japan, as back in Japan the students would be the ones on cleaning duty and everything, but here the teachers take care of cleaning up the classroom. Overall, Izuku must admit that the American schools are quite different from the schools back in Japan, as back in Japan the students would be the ones on cleaning duty and everything, but here the teachers take care of cleaning up the classroom at the end of the days, and the students 𝗧𝗵𝗃 between classrooms depending on the subject that they would be teaching, while back in his old school the teachers would be the ones that would come to them so that the students wouldn't be out in the halls all of the time wasting time between classes. Japan saw that it was easier for the teachers to just 𝗧𝗵𝗃 between the classrooms instead, as they could walk faster and just bring whatever material they needed from the staff room or have it prepared in the classroom beforehand. Izuku's first class of the day was similar back to Japan, where he had a homeroom class, and luckily for him, the tour didn't take that long, as he was taken to the classroom just a few minutes after homeroom started. The tour guide knocked on the door and was called in when the teacher inside called them in so that Izuku could be introduced to the class. Izuku followed the guide into the room, and the class had only a limited amount of students, which made sense due to the fact that it was a private academy that aimed to have lower student-to-teacher ratios so that the teachers could spend more individual time with each student instead of spending it across or so students. So at this school the numbers were limited to a max of students, with Izuku being the th student in this classroom. The teacher asked Izuku to introduce himself to the class, and he was about to bow but remembered he was in America and not Japan anymore. As such, he stopped himself and looked at everyone as he spoke. "Hello, my name is Izuku Midoriya and I recently moved to America due to the recent passing of my mother, so I live with relatives here in America. I hope we can get along," Izuku said in a monotone voice that seemed to put everyone a bit off from Izuku, since he didn't seem open or like a welcoming individual, which Izuku was fine with, as he remembered the advice that butler Leon gave him to only allow those he truly cares for past his mask, and Izuku didn't honestly care to get along with anyone here if they couldn't deal with his lack of expressing himself, since this was only elementary school, and he had middle school as well to attempt to make friends if he can find anyone that would get past his indifference of a mask. Moving on those, Izuku was given a seat and the class started to work on some basic things, as homeroom here in this school was used to work on homework from other classes or do whatever a child needs to do in the early morning before they get into their other classes, as it was a good way to start getting the students prepared for their other classes later in the day if the homeroom teacher got their brains starting to wake up and moving this early in the morning. Though Izuku was quite bored with himself in all honesty, because due to how he was treated back in Japan he was easily able to do the missing work he hadn't done due to him showing up a few days later into the semester, because he was always a bit further ahead in his education, since he always had to be self-taught, since he knew teachers back in Japan would always try to screw him over. As the day went on, Izuku did hear something weird about the royalty of the school, which just confused the hell out of Izuku, but he didn't care as he went to eat his lunch as he followed everyone into the lunchroom. Though unknown to Izuku at this time, his future would have a lot of involvement with these so-called royalty of the private academy, as they would be his closest allies and friends in the future, but it wasn't the right time yet for him to meet them. No, Izuku needed to grow stronger himself and undergo many more things before fate would have them and Izuku cross paths, which would start altering Izuku's fate to one he would truly enjoy, as they would become the individuals that would help set him free. Now though, it was time for Izuku to return to the compound and bring an end to Izuku's first day of elementary school here in America, which he found quite boring and dull, but he would rather be doing this instead of being involved in criminal matters and having his hands stained with sins that he couldn't get rid of due to the Corona family's orders. As such, Izuku would put up with the boredom and just use the extra time he had to start expanding his knowledge into other things like the basics of medical information that he knew he would need for his quirk training and medical training back at the compound. Third POV, it has been half a year now as Izuku was heading into the winter break for his school, and many things have changed over the course of this semester. Izuku himself, due to holding his mask to hide his true emotions and expressions, had become somewhat of an outcast in his class and school, but he doesn't get bullied for it. No, it's just that people don't invite him to do things or attempt to make friends with him because they only see him as a cold and indifferent individual who is too strong to approach, and so far no one has been willing to attempt to break down his walls, as everyone is too put off by him to even attempt in the first place. Other things that have started to change is the fact that Izuku has been working more in the 𝗃𝗏 family's line of work, even though Izuku wishes he didn't have to do so, but he knew better than to try to resist since he wasn't being forced to kill someone or anything. No, what Rage was having Izuku do was gain experience in using his quirk on family members down in the medical wing, or Rage would sell off his services to be used by other organizations that would pay large sums of money for healing services for individuals that were critically injured and couldn't simply be taken to a hospital due to the fact that they were criminals or highly wanted villains by the government. As such, if they appeared in a hospital, then they would be arrested before treatment really begun. Even if they did end up getting their life saved, they didn't want to go to prison. As such, Rage saw it as a way to earn a large amount of income for the family via using Izuku's healing quirk but also spreading Izuku's name and influence. But Rage isn't stupid in actually giving out Izuku's real name, especially since they use it for his schooling and everything else. No, Izuku had what would be called a villain name as well now, and the name he decided on personally was Grace, and there were several reasons why Izuku decided to go with this as his new name in the underworld. One of the reasons was because he wanted to feel as if he was doing good, and if his name appealed to him as he was a saving grace to individuals that he was healing, then he must be doing good things, even though in his mind he knew those that he was going to be healing would go back out and cause harm to others. He couldn't let himself get stuck by those thoughts, and the second reason was that one day he hoped that he would be given a saving grace himself to allow him to break free of the 𝗃𝗏 family, though that reason was just a whimsical one in his mind. As time passed, Izuku's quirk grew stronger and faster every single time he used it to heal people, as when he first used it on that first day of training it took him a few minutes to heal just bruising and very small cuts on his body, but now Izuku could healing a large gash that was lethal in about minutes now, so he was improving quite well, as he was really only limited currently by the lack of available life energy sources. So Rage made sure all of the places that Izuku would perform his services would be near a forest or several large trees, so that Izuku wouldn't have to use his own personal life energy or others, since it would be bad for business if he killed someone from the other side to heal another one on the other party's side. As such, by the end of the first school semester, there were rumors going around the underground of the Saving Grace or the Prince of the Underground that would heal individuals for the right amount of money, and it didn't matter how bad the wound was. Izuku was quite sure these so-called rumors had been started by the 𝗃𝗏 family themselves, without many people even realizing that they were being somewhat played, because the more famous that Izuku was in the underground, then the more money that Rage could end up charging other villains for the use of Izuku's healing abilities. Though Izuku hates to admit it, he had to agree what Rage was doing was smart, since it meant that the family was acquiring a real easy revenue source that didn't involve much work on others outside of Izuku, who tended to be exhausted by the end of his quirk usage. Though Izuku guesses he had to be thankful for this as well, since it was giving him practice with his quirk as he was getting better and better at it, and could use it for his own would much easier for whenever he was injured due to an event or because the training had gotten too rough. Now, speaking about the training itself, Izuku was starting to show a lot more muscles on his body, as the process was not being rushed but was done slowly and with thought, as his body was having really defined muscles without bulking up greatly, as it was unhealthy to quickly put on so much muscle without doing it in stages. As such, Izuku was starting to get a body fit for someone that was focused on speed and maneuverability rather than pure raw strength. Though there was one interesting incident that Izuku felt annoyed at but was glad for all of his training for that day, since he would rather be with the 𝗃𝗏 family and have his deal with Rage than the conditions he suspected he would have in the other organization's grasps. Now you might wonder what Izuku is talking about, so let's explain. One day Izuku was taken out by several of the guards to perform healing servicing for another organization that made the appropriate payment, but things turned a bit south during that deal when it should have been just a typical go in and heal and then leave type thing. Sadly for Izuku, one of the guards that were with him decided to step out of the room, leaving Izuku with only one guard when the other side had two guards plus the injured individual. The other guards that were with Izuku were all standing outside, so they couldn't help when Izuku finished healing the injured man, which Izuku thought was far too uninjured in his views, and he was right that it didn't make sense to pay what they did to heal what Izuku healed. A few seconds after Izuku finished healing the man, Izuku felt a gun to the side of his head and heard a gunshot go off as the guard that was with him went down to the floor clutching his stomach as he had just gotten shot. All of the other guards came running in to find Izuku being held hostage by the other side, and this did not mean anything good, since if Izuku had gotten killed or critically injured, then Rage was going to kill everyone involved that was meant to be guarding Izuku. Thankfully, due to all of the training, Izuku knew how to stay calm in this situation, since he has had a gun pointed at him during training enough not to freak out. As the standoff happened, Izuku activated his quirk with his eyes closed because he could feel the life energy sources even without his eyes open, and then slowly started to pull the energy away from the other side that was holding him hostage. Izuku of course never plans to kill anyone ever again outside of his father or him, at least 𝗵𝗃, but he took enough of their energy that they became disorientated, and to the point that Izuku reaction time was far faster than the one that held the gun to his head. As such, Izuku quickly ducked down and pushed the gun upwards as he hit the man in the side of the stomach and disarmed him. In those moments, Izuku's other guards all attacked and took out the other hostile men as Izuku is focused to the guard that had gotten shot at the start. Of course, even if Izuku wanted to heal the man, he had to first remove the bullet that was inside of him, because if he just straight up healed the guard, then the wound would close with the bullet still inside, which could kill the man later on due to poisoning from the bullet materials, or it could end up touching an important organ due to being shifted around inside of the body, which is extremely fragile inside. Izuku knew he had to open the man up and remove the bullet right there, but he didn't fully understand the human body as he was still learning medical principles and the insides of the body, but thankful due to stealing so much energy from the hostile guards, Izuku had enough that even as he made mistakes and caused his guard to start bleeding even more, he could heal those mistakes and was able to remove the bullet. Now if you ask the guard that got shot, he would say it was far more painful to be Izuku's test subject on for Izuku's first real operation inside of the human body, since he had 0 numbing drags in him, but the man was still glad that he got to live instead of dying, so he doesn't regret going through the extremely painful surgery, or whatever you want to call Izuku's exploration into his body. Though of course, this didn't mean the end to everything, as Rage had been informed of what had happened, of course, as Izuku was put directly in the line of danger with a gun to his head. This resulted in Rage taking a large number of members in the following days and wiping out an entire organization that decided their stomach was larger than what their mouth could handle, since they tried to take a bite out of the #1 crime family when the organization that tried to steal Izuku was only a small family that wanted to try to make a name for themselves. As a result, about individuals ended up dead from that incident, and Izuku felt 0 guilt since he is not the one that killed them nor encouraged them to try to steal him, so they could only blame themselves for their deaths. Now, this isn't to say that Izuku was glad they were dead, no. Izuku hated the fact that people were dying over him, but he knew to keep his emotions in check and his mouth shut in front of Rage, because he had a clear show of force from Rage on what the man could do when he was antagonized, so Izuku knew better than to preach for people to be spared or not harmed. This was a villain organization and he was a part of the underworld, so he knew and had come to accept the fact that people were going to die over the past semester as he got more involved in healing individuals. Though Izuku wasn't a fool in all of this and had his own plans that were slowly coming together as he grew stronger and stronger, but it was too early to put anything into motion, and he knew it would likely be years or even longer before he decided to take the first step in any of his plans to try to gain freedom, as he didn't want to risk anything on a small whim of his. As such, Izuku could only grit his teeth as Rage returned to the compound covered in blood and started to heal any of the members that had any wounds or were too exhausted due to the fight, as he did every time there was a mission that required a team to go out. One day I will break free and bring this family down in my escape, Izuku thought as he healed all of the members, but allowed nothing to show on his face as he healed them, as he had nearly perfected his mask during the entire semester of schooling as he dealt with other adults and children around his age. This was the first major event of America's underground prince's famous story to power in the underworld and how he changed everything in the coming future. Third POV. Izuku sighed as he sat down on the bench in the park, as he was a bit tired from school today, since it has been a few months into his second semester at the private academy and they had one of the extra-long gym classes to do a required physical fitness test that the government has required of everyone to see how children throughout all ages are health-wise, but Izuku thought it was just a waste of his time in all honesty. But he had to do it no matter what. As such, Izuku had texted butler Leon about staying out of the compound for some extra hours since he wanted to go to a park that he had found a bit hidden away recently when he was out running around the city. Izuku doubted it was hidden on purpose or anything, but he expected that a lot of people had forgotten about this nice playground in the park due to more cool-looking playgrounds that had more things to offer that opened up in other nearby places in the city. Overall, it was a small playground, but it was still in decent shape, as it looked like the city at least kept it maintained, or someone kept it maintained, as there wasn't any overgrown grass or anything in the playground area that would lead Izuku to. Overall, it was a small playground, but it was still in decent shape, as it looked like the city at least kept it maintained, or someone kept it maintained, as there wasn't any overgrown grass or anything in the playground area that would lead Izuku to think it was completely forgotten by everyone in the city. As such, Izuku, with the approval of butler Leon, who said Izuku had to be back in a few hours, was allowed to stay out of the compound, which was fine since he didn't tend to have anything on his schedules on Fridays, so it was good for him to do what he generally wanted on Fridays. Now though, today seems to have different plans in store for Izuku, as it was today that Izuku Midoriya would have his first official run-in with the people known as the royalty that attends his private academy, and his future would start to slowly change with their help. As Izuku was playing on the playground equipment at the park, he failed to notice that he was no longer alone at the said park, as there were two pairs of eyes that were staring at him, and these eyes belonged to a young boy and a young girl that looked to be the same age as Izuku. If one did not know any better, then you could very well assume that the two children, who were watching Izuku in a creepy way, if one would say so, were related due to their appearances, but they weren't related at all. No, in fact, these two young children were just friends via their families, who both have descended from Egyptian origins, which resulted in a darker tone of skin that has become a common trait of the family due to how their genes tended to be far more 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗏 than others. Now while they were creepily watching Izuku from the bushes, they had become slightly intrigued by Izuku Midoriya, even though they hardly knew anything about Izuku because they didn't even know his name at all. Nope. The only things that they knew about him outside of the fact that he went to their school were the fact that he was said to be indifferent to everyone else that was in his class, since they did not share the same classroom in their grade level. They have also passed by Izuku in the hallways before, which they have noticed that he never tries to pander to them or even acknowledge their existence, which they always found odd. Now, before everyone jumps to conclusions about these two children, they don't have large egos nor are they self-centered, but the reason they are so used to people treating them like royalty is where their nicknames came from in their private school is due to their families. The families hold the number 1 hero position and the number 2 hero position currently, and their family has held these positions for a long time as well in the past, with their elders always being heroes, which have resulted in both of their families gaining a large amount of influence in America due to how loved and popular their families was over the generations. Hell, even when All Might was in America for his younger years, the man failed to obtain the number 1 position for a long period of time during his stay in America. After a short period of time, when he had indeed achieved the number 1 hero position, he ended up getting knocked down from the position once again, and this was due to the fact that in the United States of America they had a high crime rate, which means many different things for the citizens' reactions. The citizens didn't stay all that absorbed in All Might's performance in America due to the fact that, well, the other heroes were far more efficient and better, but not in strength. It was the fact that the other heroes would constantly put out better case rates on them being solved with less damage than what All Might caused during his younger years in America. As such, the two children's parents ended up securing the top spots once again easily within a year due to the fact that the novelty of the smile and the "I am here" ended up wearing off for the citizens. This was due to the fact that the citizens of the United States were far more interested and concerned about the effectiveness and the results that the heroes did, instead of just the posturing of wanting to keep people safe, which Americans saw All Might as doing, since his cases and everything else was not up to the same amount of the American heroes which held the top positions. As a result, he ended up falling from the top 2 spots and was always stuck in the top 10, but never achieving the top during his stay in America. Anyway, due to the fact that the two children's families have had a large history in the hero field in America, with them always producing results, the families have a large amount of influence that they generated as a result of their service. This resulted in other students, teachers, or even random people that recognized them pandering to them or wanting to get close to them for benefits. This resulted in them never getting close to those outside of the family, so color them surprised when there was a new student that had been in the school for over an entire semester now that completely ignores them, even though they were sure that the green-hair classmate of their most likely heard about them from others. Though what surprised them even more was the fact that they were currently watching the green-hair show emotions when it was said that he only showed indifference to others in the hallways and classroom. They watched Izuku play on the playground by himself, which resulted in him showing emotions such as joy and a bit of happiness, but to the two children they also saw something else in this scene, and that was the fact that in front of them was a boy that looked lost and sad behind his eyes, as they were good at seeing others' hidden emotions. As if they were on the same wavelength of thought, both of the children had decided that they wanted to talk to the green-haired classmate of theirs that seems to always ignore others and especially their existence, because there was one thing they truly wanted in their lives, and that was to have new friends that didn't want to just get benefits out of them. They knew friendship was a give and take, so they weren't stupid, but they didn't want to be used by others solely due to who they were. As such, they slowly started to leave the bushes that they were hiding in and moved towards where their classmate was standing currently, but sadly for them they were quiet enough as they created noise when they were moving through the bushes. This resulted in Izuku hearing them and becoming alerted to their presence and that someone had seen his true emotions that he always kept hidden. As such, he quickly snapped towards where he heard the sounds, and it led of course directly to the two famous royal children, but sadly for them, Izuku quickly put his emotionless mask back on and hid his emotions once again. The two children were stunned to see such a sudden shift in emotions from the joy that Izuku had been showing to absolutely nothing. There was only a face of complete indifference that was being displayed to them, and they even had a strong time seeing past his mask to see the emotions he was hiding in his eyes. However, both of them only took this as a challenge because for all reason they knew of the green-haired classmate in front of them was the prime person to be friendship material with them, and they were going to expand their duo into a trio regardless if the said green-hair student wanted it or not. See what I did here? In canon, Izuku takes any denial of friendship as a fight to the death type challenge. After coming out of their shock, they both started to walk towards Izuku, but what they didn't expect to happen was for the said green-hair boy that they were wanting to talk to would just walk away without even hearing them out or their introductions. Now while those two stood frozen in the park where Izuku had just left them standing, Izuku was currently walking towards the train station while deep in his thoughts, as he did recognize the two other children that had stumbled upon him in the park. The issue with that is the fact that he had no idea why they wanted to try and talk to him or anything else, as they shouldn't have anything that they wanted to do with Izuku since he was just the lonely isolated kid at the school while they were the so-called royalty of the school. Izuku just had no idea why, and that may be due to the fact that he ignores everything about them, because if he didn't he might have been able to put together that he was an oddity to them and they wanted to try to befriend him since he has a large mind in all honesty. But Izuku, of course, is a dense and sad child that is only just wanting to be free from Rage and the rest of the Mafia family. Soon Izuku was on the bus and was on the way back towards the compound, but unknown to Izuku at that time he only made himself even more of an interesting thing in the eyes of the school royals, as no one has ever blatantly ignored them as Izuku had done. As such, this only fueled their longing to talk to Izuku in their minds, because the green-haired kid from their school was just a ball of mystery that they wanted to solve and gain the friendship of. So they decided to deploy the skills that they have learned from their families over the years in training to gather the starting information on who exactly was the green-haired classmate of theirs, as the school was always filled with rumors that they could capitalize on, because they wouldn't go to their families over this, as it would be a way to only scare the other side off if big-name heroes just suddenly started to dig into your life. They also knew that behind the mask that their green-haired classmate was putting up was a sad child, and they wanted to know why, because they without a doubt would report any crimes to their parents if their new friend, even though Izuku hadn't agreed to it yet, was in danger, and only if the two royals of the private academy knew how true they were in their sense that Izuku was in a dangerous situation, but that would come later on as they grow closer and Izuku opens up to them. Third POV. Annoyance is what Izuku Midoriya was currently feeling right now, as his normal days at school seem to have become less and less peaceful each and every single day that has passed by since his run-in with the two so-called royals of the private academy. He doesn't understand why they won't level him alone, because, on the second day after the meeting in the park, Izuku could always feel their gazes on his back when his head was turned, because they would be looking straight at him in the eyes if he ever turned in their direction in time. However, as the weeks passed on, the two devil children, Izuku's mind started to get bolder and bolder in their actions, to a point that other people in their school were starting to notice their actions and the fact that they had some sort of interest in the so-called quiet and isolated green-haired kid of their school. Of course, The two royals that Izuku had been avoiding or at least attempting to avoid didn't realize what would happen based on the stalkerish habits that they had when it came to Izuku Midoriya, and that is because of the stalking habits they ended up creating a misunderstanding by those that were really stupid and wanted to play a game of trying to gain influence with the royals. These idiots had thought that they now had a way to pander and impress the two so-called royals in the school by dealing with Izuku Midoriya, because you know this is some fan fiction out of a novel where the villains gain the favor of the higher-ups by dealing with the so-called bug. Of course, this isn't some weird fan fiction. Of course not. Sadly, these idiots thought it was indeed some weird storyline they lived in where they go off to deal with the so-called bug for the popular people, but this so-called bug was named Izuku Midoriya, and was far more familiar with these types of situations this time around due to all of the training he received so that he could defend himself, as the year worth of training he had with the family was filled with harsh combat training that never held back at all, because why should they when Izuku could just heal himself back up? They of course didn't understand how skilled Izuku was, nor the fact that the two who had been talking Izuku didn't want Izuku to be harmed or anything else, but instead they wanted to become friends with Izuku, as they had finally learned his name from a teacher who they had asked. As lunch break came around one day, it all started to play out as Izuku had decided to take his lunch with him to go to a spot that he had found recently, since he had been trying to avoid the stalkers, and Izuku knew full well that they were stalking him because they had been getting bolder, as we said before, in their stalking habits and barely even hid it anymore. Though even Izuku didn't expect a situation like this, because now he was standing in front of a group of 10 kids that were all around him, and they kept spewing some bullshit about earning the favor of the two royals if they dealt with the green hair kid, which Izuku knew was an indication to himself since he was the sole green hair kid in the school. Anyway, we can see them all still spewing the garbage out of their mouths as Izuku just sighed as he decided to place his lunch off to the side so that it didn't get destroyed, as he knew this was going to break out into a fight no matter what kind of excuse he tried to use to escape, and he was honestly glad he paid attention in the combat training classes when they taught him how to deal with fights that were groups versus a single person such as the one he was in right now. Though let's be clear that Izuku is in no way in any shape or form a MSTR of quirkless combat against anyone that primarily relies on their quirk who was also near his age range, then he was sure that he would win the fight. This was due to the fact that once again he trained with brutal trainers that didn't care that he was a child nor held back against him ever, so he was ready for this fight. As such, he knew very well to let the fighters attack him first for many reasons, like legal reasons. The legal reason was based on the biggest golden rule of the family he was a part of, and that was the fact that you never give others the legal means to put the blame on you or the ability to dig into your life based on a legal matter that you are in if you were presented as the starter of the fight. The other reason that Izuku allowed them to start the fight first was that you do not attack first in a group because they will get cocky and impatient due to the fact that you didn't attack first, which will make the group disorganized when multiple opponents try to attack at the same time, and it will show if they have never fought together in a team battle in these few seconds. If a group is disorganized, then most of the time when multiple people attack, it will cause an opening to happen if they try to attack at the same time, which will allow the single individual to have an advantage in the fight, which is what Izuku Midoriya did as he waited for them to start the fight, and right away in seconds an opening presented itself which allowed him to break their stances and defeat the first few within a few blows. Right after this happened, Izuku ducked down even more as he went in for a low-angled attack. This was due to the fact that he was far better and suited for quick and low attacks due to his height and overall build. Even though Izuku has been growing taller and gaining muscles due to his training, he was still a bit shorter than most of the people that were the same age as him, plus he was also taught to fight dirty in battle as well, which a lot of his opponents are men and they become easy targets if you know what Izuku would be aiming for. There was also the fact that considering where Izuku lives, it's not surprising at all for him to be taught to fight dirty all of the time, because why not in their line of work? Now, as several of the other kids quickly got dispatched by Izuku due to their overall lacking skills and stupidity, Izuku noticed that the others were far more on guard now and even were taking up better defenses, which included the fact that some had their quirks activated. Though unless Izuku found himself in a high level of danger, then he wasn't going to turn his quirk on, since quirk usage against others is illegal, even though he could get away with it due to self-defense, but then it would be their word against his. Plus it would also reveal the true nature of his quirk if he used it for offensive abilities instead of the nice healing nature that everyone thinks it's limited to. The fight continued on, and all Izuku could think of was the fact that they were so slow. Then again he did train under people who once again as he would say never held back against him, which has resulted in Izuku's reflexes being on a higher level than those around his age. Sadly though, even though they all were so slow to him, the one thing Izuku wanted to avoid ended up happening. Now you might think it was about him getting hurt or something, but no, the one thing he wanted to avoid happening was that one kid decided to grab Izuku's lunch and be a petty child as they tossed his lunch on the ground with a smirk before they ran away like a coward. Izuku just stood there looking at his lunch with an emotionless mask on his face, but inside he was crying, and the reason may sound silly to some, but to him, it wasn't the food that he had gotten for lunch today was 𝗧𝗵𝗃, and 𝗧𝗵𝗃 was only made in the lunchroom on so many days each month, and today he had been lucky to grab the last portion of it before they ran out. Now the reason it made him so upset was the fact that 𝗧𝗵𝗃 was the meal that Izuku's mother Izuku Midoriya would always make for him when he really needed to be cheered up. When Izuku learned that the lunchroom was making this food, he was so happy and excited inside because he never ate it at the compound, even though he could get the kitchen to make it, but he didn't want them to know that it was such a personal dish that he felt strongly about due to him hiding his emotions. As such, Izuku grabbed his remains of the lunch and took it with him as he headed towards the cafeteria, where he found the two individuals he had some anger for currently. As Izuku walked into the lunchroom, he headed towards them as they smiled a bit, but sadly for them this wasn't going to be like how they wanted it. As they watched him come towards them, they quickly introduced themselves as 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏 and 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏, but Izuku didn't care as he dropped his food remains in front of them and spoke, "I don't care, the next time you send your goons to try and beat me up, then send stronger ones or get the courage to do it yourself, you cowards. Also, you owe me several meals worth of 𝗧𝗵𝗃 since your goons destroyed my precious 𝗧𝗵𝗃." Izuku said before he just turned around and left the same way he entered and didn't even let them speak again. Though honestly they were stunned in silence as they were shocked at how he talked to them and what he meant. After Izuku left, the two royals in his view came out of their shock and wanted to know what their friend, who still doesn't really know about this detail or agreed with it, meant by the so-called goons that they had sent, as they had done no such thing. Then after a bit, they started to hear whispers from others in the lunchroom as they paid attention and were able to find out some information that some students had gone after Izuku to try and win their favor. The two of them were downright, as they were now likely hated or disliked by the single person that they wanted to become close friends with. They both got started right away on questioning who all was involved, because they were going to ensure that their newest friend, though once again the said friend never agreed to the so-called friendship, would know that they had nothing to do with the said attack on him. Though in the back of both of their minds they couldn't help themselves from picturing Izuku as an angry kitten that was throwing a fit, as Izuku just seemed like a kitten to them every time he pouted or talked, since they would end up imaging a tail and ears on him for some reason. Anyway, there was also the matter that some people had ended up using their family names and theirs to go out and commit some bullying, which downright them the hell off, as their family always valued the honor of the family and would defend it, and that is exactly what the two of them were planning to do as they tracked down each and everyone that had decided to have a hand in amusing Izuku during that day. Though some tried really strong to hide themselves during their search, soon they were all found in the end, and this resulted in them being added to a list that the two now called the Blacklist, and anyone that ended up on this list meant that they offended the duo or offended their friend Izuku, though Izuku had no idea of this so-called blacklist until later on, as it would leave him just even more confused with the duo. Then Izuku is only more confused now as, after a few days since the event in the lunchroom, Izuku heard rumors that the duo was going around and saying that Izuku was indeed their friend and was part of their group, so everyone should never lay their hands on him or they would suffer the duo's wrath. Izuku decided though that it was time to just face the other two head-on and figure everything out and what they wanted from him, as he was starting to get annoyed at all of this chaos that the duo was causing for him since that fateful meeting in the park about a month or so ago. Third POV. Izuku is pretty sure he made a stupid decision today, and one that he is already regretting due to all of the stares that he was getting from everyone now due to the said decision he had made earlier. But first let's jump back to what happened so we all understand what has happened. It has been about a week since the rumors began about Izuku and the duo who Izuku knows as 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧𝗏 and 𝗧𝗏𝗧𝗏 had begun. Izuku had decided that it was time for a face-to-face conversation of what they exactly wanted from him. As such, once lunchtime came rolling around, Izuku stepped into the lunch line right next to both of the other children and spoke, "I think it's time we have a talk about everything and clear the air between us. This way there are no more confusing matters left unanswered between us in regards to everything that has happened this semester." Izuku said, but before they could even respond to his statement, Izuku took his food and walked away towards the door where he had entered from. Standing at the door, he turned around and looked at both of them as a sign for them to follow him, as he wanted this to be a private conversation and he was sure they would want it to be private as well, which they indeed wanted it to be private. After walking for a few minutes outside of the school building, yet while still on the school property, they were all now located at the spot that Izuku had located during the start of the second semester, though this thought of having found this place at the start of the second semester terrified him a bit. The reason may seem silly to some, but to Izuku it terrified him a bit, since they were getting a lot closer to the summer break, which meant that it would be nearly an entire year since Izuku had found himself in this entire situation. This terrified him of how much has changed in his life and how desensitized he had become to this new life that he now lives, as all of the BLD and scary things no longer terrify him anymore, and it had only been less than a year since he was introduced to this life. Suddenly though, Izuku was snapped out of his thoughts by two hands being pressed against his shoulder, which of course belonged to Izuku's troublesome duo that has always been stalking him since that day in the park. Though Izuku was confused when he looked at the two of them and noticed that they had faces filled with some concern, which honestly was a foreign emotion that Izuku hasn't dealt with in a while due to everything that has happened. You were never shown concern in the family, and showing concern was a sign of weakness, as whatever you showed concern for would become targeted by others outside of the family or sometimes even inside of the family. Anyway, that emotion they were showing wasn't used much with him, so it caught him a bit off guard as he ended up stirring his words out a bit when he asked them why they were looking at him with concern, but the answer made something in him twist a bit. Both of them told Izuku that they could see past his mask and that they were worried about him since he was their friend. At that point, it felt as if Izuku's mind came to a complete standstill and blue screened like a computer would do to what they had just said to him. They are concerned about me and can see past my mask, was the thought that was going inside of Izuku's mind until he realized that they had just called him their friend like the rumors were saying around the school. Izuku though just ended up staring at the two of them as if they were complete idiots, and they were somewhat in his mind because he never agreed to become friends with them at all. Though as both of them just stared right back at Izuku, he started to have the urge of rolling his eyes, but instead, Izuku just outright called them both idiots for declaring him as a friend when he hasn't even agreed with it. Sadly for Izuku, both of them just shrugged at his comments and then asked if he wanted to be friends, since he was concerned about if he had agreed to it or not, which just made Izuku want to roll his eyes even more, but he had a mask of indifference to maintain even though they claimed to be able to see past it. Both of the children continued to ignore Izuku's stare of contempt that he was holding with his eyes, but it seemed as if they weren't affected by it, so he spoke up again. "What if I say no?" Izuku asked, and then Zara spoke up and gave Izuku options to choose from, which honestly wasn't a choice, as she gave him either yes or well yes. As such, they just stood there in silence at that statement of options before Izuku tried to back away from the conversation and leave, but sadly for him they both grabbed a hold of him and dragged him down to the ground. This is how Izuku ended up finding himself being stared at by others from the school, as the two other children that were meant to be all proper and whatnot were found tangled up with Izuku, who was meant to be the isolated child of the school due to his own actions. Izuku just sighed as he told them that he surrenders to their demands and agreed to become friends, which caused them both to smirk, but it wasn't a typical one, no. Izuku realized it as a shiver went down his back that the smirk that they were holding would belong to a SDST, and it was at that moment Izuku realized he had just screwed up, as he became friends with two SDST, which meant double the trouble that he was going to be involved in due to them. Their acts of being all proper and whatnot is complete bullshit, Izuku thought as he stared at them, and honestly wished he could take his agreement back, but he doubted they would let him. There was also the fact that he was sure he heard them mutter something about him being like a pouting kitten, but he refused to explore that topic and decided to just ignore that train of thought. They soon freed Izuku from being tangled up by them, as it was time to go to their separate classrooms, but Izuku knew his future days were likely to be filled with some sort of chaos which would be caused by the duo, and this thought honestly made his lips curve slightly upwards. Though no one outside of the twins would likely notice it, since they somehow are good at seeing the smileless change about Izuku, because to everyone else it would look as if nothing had changed with him. Anyway, Izuku moved back towards his classroom as he kept that very small smile hidden on his face as he arrived at this classroom and sat down so the rest of the day would start moving forward. Though as the day moves forward like normal, he felt the eyes of many watching him, and he wasn't surprised by this at all. It was normal to have all of these eyes on him now due to the fact that he heard things being talked about, like the fact that the royal duo had now turned into the royal trio, but Izuku did hear some question on how a supposed no-name outcast such as Izuku ended up with the royal duo. Izuku honestly wanted to point out that he did abruptly nothing outside of ignoring the duo, which seemed to have drawn them in as they took it as a challenge, but Izuku kept himself silent as he couldn't break his mask of indifference with everyone, as it would cause problems back in the complex, as it was now an ingrained rule that showing others his true emotions would be costly if they couldn't defend themselves. Izuku remembered that rule quite well since the incident a few months ago when he had found an injured cat in the woods of the compound. Izuku doesn't think he will ever forget the fact that the poor cat was used as an example of why he should never allow his mask to fall, as one of the executives decided to kill the poor injured cat in front of Izuku since he had been healing the cat when he and the cat got found by the man. The words of the man echoed in Izuku's ears: "Never get close to those that can't protect themselves or have strong protection against threats. Your enemies will use those that you get close to as a way to harm you," the man said as he pulled his gun and killed the cat right in front of Izuku. Though there was one other thing that Izuku would always remember, and it was the fact that he hated that man, as there was no reason, or rather a true reason in Izuku's mind, on why the cat had to die, because Izuku wasn't even close to it and was only healing it before the man had killed it. Though Izuku had to admit the lesson was learned on not opening up to others that didn't have protection or weren't able to defend themselves. Soon though the day came to an end and it was time to return to the compound, but before Izuku could leave towards the train station, the duo ran up to Izuku and gave him their numbers, which Izuku did save into his phone but not in his contacts. Izuku was not an idiot or stupid enough to do that, as he knew the butler aka Leon would have access to see his contacts. Izuku didn't want butler Leon to start digging into his new friends, because Izuku had learned recently why the duo was called royalty at the school, and that it was due to their families having a long history of being powerful heroes. That would lead to an interesting conversation between butler Leon and Izuku on if he was trying to break free or not via their families, but the thing thought was that Izuku knew he was playing a dangerous game by accepting them as friends. They were children of powerful heroes, but not just any heroes, the children of the top 2 heroes as well. As such, Izuku knew that they also had a large amount of protection due to their families being able to protect them if Rage ever came to learn about Izuku's connection to them. This is why Izuku was willing to play the dangerous game that he was now entering into, as he wanted to have friends, and he also knew deep down the undeniable truth of his situation. Even though Izuku had a unique position in the family, he was still expendable, and this was due to the fact that Rage knew the risk and rewards of keeping Izuku around. If Rage killed Izuku, then he loses the future value Izuku brings in, but there was the fact that as Izuku aged and grew stronger, the danger that he presented towards Rage and the family would also grow in strength as well, so there was going to be a point that the risk of keeping Izuku alive would outweigh the reward that the family gained from keeping him around. As such, in those few seconds when the duo offered to become friends with Izuku, he accepted because he wanted to live his life a bit riskier and enjoy it as much as he could, since he knew they would have a large layer of protection that Rage would be hesitant to touch, since it would invoke all of America's attention on him quickly if he was accused of going after hero families. Third POV, Izuku would say he was a good judge of someone's character due to all of the events and situations that he has been involved with during the past year or so, but good God, Izuku never felt like he was so wrong before when he decided to allow the duo into his life, because he was right that day when he confronted them. They were indeed SDST individuals who enjoyed watching others suffer due to the pranks and things that they pull off, because they liked watching people squirm in embarrassment, which causes them to smile so big when they are sure others aren't looking. Thank all of the gods is what Izuku does every day when he can, because he luckily never ended up on the side of their awful pranks. That didn't mean he didn't get teased by them though, because they sure did enjoy teasing him all of the time. No, all of the things done to Izuku were always done in privacy, where they and he were alone and away from others that could see, since the duo didn't want to drive Izuku away by having people laugh at him. No, they wanted him to stay close with them, but even then all of the things they did do to Izuku were all childish things, like those worms in a can where they pop out once you open the lid, or other childish things, since they enjoyed teasing Izuku. Everything else tended to take a few levels up because they enjoyed tormenting others with non-harmful pranks that didn't cause any pain, and they made sure to target people that they were sure would not be mentally affected by their pranks, so anyone that they were sure might be bullied was off the list of being targeted. The duo always was careful, since they wanted to have fun and not actually hurt people, which Izuku was pleased with. Though just lightly teasing and pranking people wouldn't give them something to enjoy, no, they tend to hit the same target multiple times in one day to see the frustration that the individual has from getting targeted multiple times in a single day. That is how they got their own personal enjoyment from tormenting people with their unharmful pranks. Though when it came to the things that they did to Izuku, he was pretty sure that they only did things that would likely result in Izuku laughing himself and not for their own enjoyment of seeing it, as he was sure that they were trying to get him to break out of his mask with the pranks that they were pulling, but he wasn't going to break so easily, even though he did find quite a few of them funny, but he is trained strong in maintaining his mask, so he was good at not breaking out of it due to sudden surprises. Anyway, as we pointed out for Izuku, it has now been over an entire year since Izuku was sold into his current lifestyle, which was a depressing thought. This meant of course that Izuku had turned 10 years old now, which makes him now in the TH grade, and an additional bonus of moving up a grade was the fact that the duo somehow got it arranged for them all three to be in the same classes now, which Izuku refuses to admit to anyone that he actually enjoys. Though entering the TH grade did also remind Izuku that he only had this year and next before he would enter middle school, which would only be a short leap to high school, and that thought ate away at the back of his mind due to the fact that he was only getting closer to high school, which would likely be his prime chance. Suddenly that line of thoughts in Izuku's mind came to an end before they could finish forming, as it was thrown away, as he doubted he would even be alive that long to begin with, since he was realistic about his situation. Back to the present though, as Izuku looked down to his sides as both of his friends Ozzy and Zara were laying down right next to him and leaned against him as they sat at the tree in the park that they had their first official run-in with each other. They would always come to the park every few days after school when Izuku could get the time scheduled to do so, because he knew not to raise too much attention to the fact that he was really close to someone, since he didn't want them to be known by anyone at the compound yet. Anyway, Izuku wouldn't admit it in front of either of them, but he was starting to trust them far more than he lets on to them, but he still didn't trust them fully yet in some roundabout way due to his life situation. For example, Izuku knew that children around their age normally would have gone to each other's houses, but that was never going to happen in regards to Izuku's living situation, since taking them to the compound would be a horrible decision for everyone involved. Now going to their house wasn't completely out of the picture, but Izuku didn't want to go do that yet, as it was a bit risky, and he didn't mean in regards to his association with the mafia family, no. Izuku meant that it was risky for him to go to his friends' houses and meet their families, which he knew were the top-ranked heroes, because he might want to do something stupid like trying to ask them for help or something else that would likely end up with him dead at the end. Now Izuku doesn't discount whatever plan that the full-grown adult pro heroes could come up with, but having a bomb right next to his heart makes him pretty damn sure he wants whatever plan to be nearly bulletproof, since they would be playing with his life. Instead of doing all of that super risky stuff, Izuku decided that he just wanted to throw it to the side and let the future version of himself deal with those type of problems, because the present Izuku wanted to just enjoy the present with his two friends while it lasted, since he was sure they wouldn't be around once it was known who he was associated with, even if he was unwilling. Soon though the day came to an end and Izuku stopped putting brainpower into all of these issues and got ready to go back to the compound, since it was nearly time for him to leave anyway, as he had a schedule to keep to, so he waved goodbye to the duo and started heading towards the train station. He promised them to see them at school the next day like he always did, and left none the wise of what he would go through that night. As usual, he returned to the compound on time and started to head towards the medical bay, where he would meet the medical staff to start his shift, as he was gaining more training and experience via learning from them. As he arrived though, Izuku was told that he was to head towards the boss's office, since there was a mission that Izuku was going to be involved in. This made Izuku freeze for a brief moment, but he quickly unfroze himself and started to walk, as he knew sooner or later he would start going out once he had trained enough. There was also the fact that Butler Leon had wanted Izuku a while ago, that once he had turned 10 years old that he would likely end up starting missions that were within his skill set, since Izuku had done a lot of training and it was all known by the executives and the main boss. Rage, that he had done extra training, as there were zero ways of hiding that fact from them. As such, Izuku always knew the training would be a double-edged sword for him, and here it was hitting him right in the face, since it was now time for the double-edged part of sword to strike back to him. Izuku headed up towards the other floor and made his way to the main office that he knew Rage was always in, even though it wasn't his actual office. This office is where all of the planning for missions and battles took place when they had time to plan things out. As such, He schooled his features and relaxed his heart rate as he didn't want to allow that man to gain an inch more than required out of Izuku's obedience. As he finished calming himself down, he knocked several times on the door and then just waited, since he learned really fast from experience due to the last time he had just walked right in unannounced, which was extremely disrespectful even though Izuku was in a unique position. As such, Izuku was taught a valuable lesson of not pushing the boundaries when he got punished with an extremely strong training that he has now dubbed Hell Training, because at the very end of it, with him covered in his own blood and bruises, he was not allowed to heal himself up from all of the wounds, which resulted in them all scarring over since they were deep enough to cause scars if he didn't use his quirk. As such, Izuku had quite a few scars from that day that now display across his skin, and Izuku vowed never to allow himself to be punished like that unless he had some good reason to risk being on the receiving end of an angry rage. After a few seconds of waiting, Izuku was called into the room, and that is where he found all of the executives of the family in addition to the boss himself, as they were all standing around the table with plans on it. Izuku spoke up and said, "You wanted to see me?" He asked in rage and nodded his head as he directed Izuku to sit down at the table where they were all meeting over. After a few minutes of more talking between all of them, they sat down and Rage spoke about the mission, which was about another rival organization that decided it was strong enough now to push into some of the important areas that were under the family's control, which had enraged Rage himself. As such, the reason that Izuku was being involved in the mission was due to his healing services, since Rage wanted Izuku on site to heal the men and keep the death count on their side down to 0. This meant that this would be the real first official test of how far Izuku's healing abilities have come since the first time he actually used it himself, and not in a blind fit of rage as he did at the auction hall when he was first bought. Izuku was also told that the mission itself would be starting that very night, which meant they would be leaving soon. Izuku received his orders and left the room deep in thought about the moral debate he always had inside of himself. Izuku was glad that he wouldn't be required to fight and kill, but he was also glad that he got to save people, which is the part where the moral debate comes up for him. The issue was that he wanted to help people, but was he really helping people when he healed the villains who then would go back out and commit more crimes at a fast pace due to his healing? Sadly, Izuku never has an answer for his moral debate, but Izuku always pushed it to the side, since one day he hopes that he would have an answer to his moral dilemma, but now wasn't the time to keep digging into it. No, it was time for him to get to work as he arrived in the armory. They were expected to return the very next morning, which was nice for Izuku since he didn't want to worry his friends or raise any questions in their minds about where he would be at, so that made him happy. Now on the issue of being exhausted of being up all of that time for a kid at his age was a non-issue in all honesty for Izuku, since he could just take the energy from trees and resupply himself as it would fix his physical condition. Though Izuku forgot about the fact that it wouldn't fit his mental condition from this experience, and he would always be thankful for having his friends for the aftermath of what he would be forced to go through and the BLD that he would see. This was the start of how Ozzy and Zara would break the first barrier of Izuku's mind and gain even more of his trust, as they would help him through the mental anguish of what he would witness this night at such a young age. Third POV, Izuku was now all finished getting geared up in his outfit, and he had to admit to himself that it was an amazing outfit in his view, as it was the perfect blend of being combat capable in addition to being geared towards his medical skills and knowledge, as it had pockets for some of his medical supplies plus had a first aid attached to his back via some clips that could easily be detached quickly. As such, Izuku had everything on him as he headed down towards the garage where they would be leaving the compound from, as they would be going out in a convey of all of the members that were assigned to this mission. As Izuku sat there, he wondered how violent this conflict would become, since the more fighting that happens, the higher there is a risk of heroes or police coming, since they would be alerted by someone of the conflict, which would require them to respond to the said fight. This though would make things a bit complicated for Izuku, as it would put him in an awkward position due to the bomb being in his chest. A fear that Izuku has always had in the back of his mind was that one day a hero or someone with some power would come along and try to save him, but due to the fact that he had a pulse bomb right next to his heart, well, he would be forced to reject their efforts in saving him, which may stop people from trying to help him ever again in the future. The reason this would be is that they may come to assume that Izuku was a part of the family and was just a normal villain who enjoyed the life that he was in, but that couldn't be further from the truth, of course, regards to Izuku Midoriya. Though there was another fear that was truly what stopped Izuku from accepting the help of others in his mind if it were to ever happen, and that was the fear of death itself, since no kid would truly want to die, but accepting help from others would be the equivalent to accepting his own death due to the, you guessed it, the bomb in his chest. Now back to the main point of the night, since we have diverged off topic from the true focus, which currently is the fact that Izuku is now sitting inside one of the family's cars in the convert that is heading towards the location where they have discovered the main base of the rival organization to be located at. The goal of the mission is to hit the main location of the other organization, which will allow Rage to make them crumble easily if the top executives and leaders are defeated, and the organization's base is located about an hour south in a smaller town that they controlled, which was over the state line into New Jersey. Izuku did find out the reason why Rage was so irritated and willing to directly take action against this growing rival, and the reason was that the area the opposing group was pushing into was where the family was producing the drag known as Trigger. However, this wasn't like the other strands of the Trigger drag that was out in the market around the world and in the United States. No, this strand of the drag was and is the original stand that was ever produced in the world, as it was based on Rage's biological family lines due to their quirks, which allowed them to boost themselves. This stand does not have all of those annoying side effects like turning the tongue a different color or making the individual using the drag start to lose their sanity after so many times using it. No. This original stand purely boosts the quirk factor for a temporary amount of time, though it doesn't have any permanent boosting effects either. As such, it fits right in with the motto of the Mafia family, which is to never leave a trace, and the drag did that, as it left no trace of it being in the user's system. Izuku did wonder if there was truly no side effects, because it was something that seemed downright 𝗵𝘃𝗍𝗄 considering the fact that it was alerting or at least affecting the quirk gene itself. So in Izuku's mind there had to be some sort of trace left behind by the drag that no one else had found yet. However, now was not the time to spend deep in thoughts on the topic of the Trigger drag, as Izuku was alerted to the fact that they were arriving at the location of the enemy's compound and the fighting would kick off right away, as neither side would see eye to eye. Izuku thought he was lucky considering the fact that he was told that he wouldn't be fighting, as he would be focused solely on healing, and was even provided a few guards to keep watch over him as he worked so that he wasn't distributed by others, as Rage didn't want any of his men to die when he had Izuku, who could heal almost anything outside of death itself. Though Izuku would look back and wonder if it would have been better to fight and stain his hands that way instead of the way that it would happen this night whenever he thought back on it in the future, as tonight he was going to walk away with blood on his hands, and it wouldn't be from healing the wounded, no, it was going to be from a far more gruesome and mentally scarring way than Izuku could ever think of, and it honestly would change the way he would look at his quirk. Arriving on site, all of the cars came to a quick stop as members of the Corona family jumped out of their vehicles and started to charge into the enemy compound, and within seconds you could hear the sounds of the fight going on as screams were heard. Izuku looked around and wondered why no one was calling the police, and then he noticed something: all of the people around were downright terrified and were hiding away. Izuku was even sure he saw several police officers turn the other direction when they spotted what was going on, which caused Izuku to just shake his head in disappointment, even though he didn't want police to get involved since it would have put him in a tricky situation. Izuku just pushed forward and walked towards the compound as he spotted some trees and other areas that had large amount of life force energy due to overgrown plants that were consuming some of the nearby buildings. Izuku was just thankful that his ability to reach out and grab life energy had expanded, so he no longer had to be directly in an area close with trees or other things that he could steal energy from. Nope. Now Izuku could be an entire half a block away from whatever source of energy he wanted to steal from or heal, as his range had increased by large margins due to all of the quirk training he put into it, but he was more or less at a standstill in regards to the range that he could use his quirk, since he no longer noticed any increase in it or anything noticeable, so he was sure he hit his max range for good unless he figured a way to expand it in the future. Izuku sat down on a chair that was outside of the compound near the side of the building and just waited for the first of the wounded to be brought to him, since he radioed in where he had decided to set up his medical station at, as he laid down some fabric on the ground that he had the guards bring out of the car so people wouldn't be directly laying down on the ground in the dirt, which would make healing them a bit weird, since he needed to make sure the wounds didn't have dirt in them. Even though he could directly health things without a care, he still needed to be careful of foreign objects being inside of the wounds, since his quirk would just heal around those things, so medical knowledge came greatly in hand when it came to cleaning wounds and ensuring nothing foreign was inside of the area he was going to heal. After about minutes of fighting, the first individuals were brought to him and he started to get to work on healing them. Most of the wounds he was seeing were relatively in his mind minuscule things such as burns or stab wounds that were easily fixed up due to the sheer amount of training he has gone through with those type of things, but about half an hour into the fighting is when he got his first critical individual as they were missing the bottom half of their left arm from the elbow down. Izuku had the individual laid down as he started to clean the wound out and injected some 𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃 around the area he was working on. Of course Izuku did the typical medical stuff and asked how he got the wound, which Izuku was told that the family member ran into a guy with a quirk that allowed him to cut through things with a metal wire, so Izuku was warned that he could end up seeing multiple people like this since the man hadn't been caught yet. The wound now made sense to Izuku since it was cut far too clean for a battle, but with the knowledge of what type of quirk attack was used, Izuku just nodded his head as he finished inspecting the wound for any foreign objects that may have ended up in it. As such, Izuku closed his eyes and searched for a decent source of life energy from a nearby tree and then started to heal the missing arm, and everyone just watched it slowly grow back. Within 2 minutes the entire missing portion of the arm was grown back and the member was already back on his feet and said he was heading back into the building as Izuku wiped a bead of sweat away from his forehead. Even though it was a moral debate of healing villains to go back out to cause harm, Izuku was still glad he could do what he could do with his quirk because it showed that he could change many people's daily lives if he could just break free from the Corona family in the future, but that thought was for another day as the battle continued for another hour before things started to calm down. As things went on, Izuku ended up healing nearly every single member that had come with them at least twice, which Izuku found odd in regards to the fact that Rage had brought so few members, but then realized he had only brought so many due to Izuku being present on site to heal the members. This allowed the individuals to go straight back into battle since the life energy would also revitalize the said individuals, so it was as if they had just woken up that morning, which was an added bonus to Izuku's healing abilities. Though sadly for Izuku's mental well-being, things decided to take a turn for the worse this night as Izuku learned that the opposing organization leaders were all captured but weren't willing to tell Rage where their other bases of operations and members were at since he couldn't find anything inside the main compound. It appears that only the leaders of the group had those pieces of information, so if Rage wanted to wipe up the entire organization as quickly as possible he needed the information, so in a fit of rage he had Izuku brought over to help with the questioning. Izuku tried to oppose as he wasn't wanting to do what Rage wanted him to do, but one look from Rage made it clear that Izuku better do what he was told or else he was going to receive a large amount of punishment once they returned, because Rage was not in any position that he was willing to negotiate or try to nicely convince Izuku to do what he was being ordered to do. Now you may wonder what exactly was Izuku being told to do. Well, Rage ordered Izuku to use his quirk and steal the life energy from the leaders of the other group and leave them on the edge of death for a few moments before healing them completely up and then repeating this until Rage said to stop. Izuku raised his hand and his eyes glowed as he activated his quirk and started to do it as he didn't want to be punished by Rage, and especially not by the man in the mood he was in, as Izuku was sure his entire body would be covered in scars by the next day. This meant that Izuku drained them and refilled them non-stop, but going through this process of having the energy of your entire life removed and then put back in had a side effect that they now discovered, since this was the first time that Izuku ever did something like this. As Izuku was fueling them back up, he noticed that there was a small loss of energy each time, which meant that he couldn't keep doing this non-stop before they ran out of energy, as Izuku was consuming some of their energy each time to keep himself going, and he had no way to stop this process as it was an automatic part of his quirk. This meant by the turn of draining and healing them they had all lost about % of their life energy, and it was showing as their bodies were clearly exhausted due to how heavy they were breathing and the eye bags that were starting to form under their eyes, as it was similar to going several days without sleep since Izuku was removing all of their energy and then pushing it back in. Normally he would be refilling someone that already had energy, which resulted in them being refreshed and energized, but that wasn't the case here since it was doing the opposite, since no energy was really being added and only removed according to their bodies. Rage himself also noticed the results and asked them once again if they would give the locations of their other compounds, but the men refused, which made Rage even more angry as he ordered Izuku to drain them all of their energy and not refill them anymore. Izuku of course complied, though he hated it as he knew what the end result would be if a human or anything ran out of life energy completely without having time to rebuild its own stocks with sleep and food, and that was death, which was the exact result the men ended up in, as several of them succumbed to the new wounds that Rage inflicted after Izuku stopped putting the energy back into them. Izuku was horrified, but he didn't let it show because even though he didn't directly kill the men that died, he had a hand in it, as his quirk was used to torture someone, and that made him look at his quirk in a horrifying light, as it was no longer just a quirk that he could use to heal people but one of death as well, even though he knew it was always capable of it. Hisashi's death had always been something that Izuku accepted as an accident due to his quirk turning on, but these men were directly impacted by Izuku in a way he directly and visually saw because of his quirk. After each of the men died without giving the information up, Rage ordered all of the men on site to finish clearing out and killing all of the 𝗳𝗵𝗃 members, which made Izuku's stomach twist as he wanted to throw up. Here he was with a quirk that was truly meant to save people, and it had purposely been used to kill someone, and all of these other individuals would be dying as well without him being able to help him due to the fact that Rage would never allow it. As such, Izuku didn't know how to feel about his quirk when he couldn't use it to help save people from death, because that was what he was good at and what was his dream of doing as a pro hero, which he didn't think he could be now that his quirk had directly been used to torture someone, and by extension he himself had tortured someone, which resulted in their death even though Rage was the one that finished them off. Izuku stood there for a few more minutes as he looked at the bodies and then at his hands before one of the guards touched his shoulder and told him it was time to leave. "Young 𝗵𝘃𝗲, it's time to go," the man said, and Izuku nodded his head as he turned around without looking back, as he knew he could not show weakness in the family nor towards anyone else. The few moments of looking at the bodies and his hands was already too big of a show of weakness that he shouldn't have done, is what his mind was telling him, but Izuku didn't know what else to do, as he wanted to stop people from dying, and in his position, even though he was called young 𝗵𝘃𝗲 by most of the family and held in high regard, he knew he was nothing but a puppet that had his strings being pulled even with the so-called deal on the table. Once again Izuku remembered that the freedom that he had been feeling by going to school and enjoying the time he had with the duo was nothing but an illusion that could end the moment that Rage wanted it to, by either killing Izuku or locking him inside of the compound. There is no such thing as true peace, as there will always be evil in the world. Only by correcting unfairness in the world can we truly make an impact by inspiring hope, which will combat the root of evil, and that is injustice and cruelty done by the human hands. Izuku said in a whisper as he walked towards the car and glazed at Rage, who had just entered his own car. Izuku could only think of the rage that was burning in the deepest parts of his stomach when he looked at Rage, as one day he knew he wanted to kill Rage, even if it made him a villain as well, because there was already blood on his hands and it was no longer an accident like it was with Hisashi Midoriya. Even with his hands 𝗲𝗏𝗃 𝗵𝗃 painted in blood, Izuku swore one day he would break the strings that controlled him. Third POV. The night and the next day bled together, as the next day quickly arrived, far too quickly in Izuku's opinion, but who was he kidding, as the entire team that went out on that nightmare-inducing mission arrived back at the compound only about 1 hour before it was time for Izuku to normally head to school for the day. Butler Leon had said he was going to call the school and let them have Izuku be excused for the day, as he would claim some family emergency or something on those lines, but Izuku didn't allow the man to do that. Instead, Izuku wanted to be away, the farthest away he could be without causing issues from Rage, and for the longest amount of time, so going to school was something he needed to do, otherwise Izuku felt he would end up doing something impulsive like trying to kill Rage due to the events of last night, where Rage had Izuku use his quirk to torture a group of individuals from the trivial organization. After some back and forth between Izuku and the Butler Leon relented and told Izuku to alert him if Izuku wanted to return home at any time during the day. Now that entire statement out of Butler Leon's mouth made Izuku's stomach twist, and he felt like he wanted to throw up so badly at the idea that this compound was his home. A home is where you are meant to feel safe, and while on a day-to-day basis he felt relatively calm and not in direct danger, he knew the compound wasn't safe in his mind, as it was a death sentence waiting to happen one day in the future if he did something wrong or Rage got paranoid about keeping Izuku alive anymore. Anyway, Izuku nodded his head at Butler Leon's statement before he went up to his room and grabbed all of the things he would need for school, and once he finished getting the things he headed outside and waited for the driver, who pulled up a few minutes after he stepped outside. Izuku would have rather taken the train to the school instead of being taken by the driver, since he stopped going by the family car after about a month of using it, since he enjoyed the time alone on the train before he had to get to school or return to the compound, but today he would be cutting it really close if he decided to take the train, since the next train from the nearest station didn't leave for another minutes and the ride takes about minutes, so if there were any delays he would have been cutting it extremely close, since there are only about minutes left before the school starts. As Izuku rode in the car, Izuku just pushed out all of the dark thoughts that have been building up in his mind since the events from last night to the back of his mind, even though he knew it was completely unhealthy to do things like that, but he didn't really have a choice. There was no way in hell that Izuku was going to allow himself to break down or show emotions in front of the drive or back at the compound, because he truly doubts he has true privacy in his own bedroom since it belonged to the family. Izuku would not put it past Rage or someone else in the family to bug his room in the event that Izuku was ever wanting to plan against the family to try and gain his freedom. As such, Izuku had no real good place for him to break down without worrying about his mask breaking in front of people that would use the moment of weakness against him, so he just kept pushing the emotions to the side as they kept appearing again and again. The driver finally arrived outside of the school gates and opened the door for Izuku to get out, as the man would always do when Izuku used the car. As Izuku exited out of the vehicle, he felt his blood go cold if it truly could, but sadly for him that was only a statement of how he felt at that second, as when he exited the car he saw that his duo of friends were both standing just inside of the gates for the school, which was a large issue due to the fact that the Corona family driver was still around. As such, Izuku quickly moved without raising any red flags from the driver and walked towards the gate, as he didn't even glance again at the duo, who looked confused by Izuku's actions since he always headed straight for them when they met up in the mornings closer to the building, but today they had decided to wait at the gates since Izuku wasn't on time like normal. Izuku, instead of coming towards them, chose to ignore them, but they didn't call out for him though. Instead, they decided to follow behind him as they acted as if it was time for them to get inside of the school instead of hanging out at the gates, as neither of them felt like Izuku was acting normally, so they wanted to see what he would do once they were in the privacy of the school away from outside eyes. The reason they went like this was due to the fact that they knew that Izuku would always take the train to and from school because, in Izuku's own words, he told them that he didn't want to convince his guardians, but now he had shown up by the car of his guardians instead of the train and completely ignored them, so the two of them correlated his change in actions to the fact that there was a third party outside that typically wasn't around, and the reason they knew how to correlate all of this was due to the training in keeping themselves safe from kidnappers and other villains, since their families always wanted them to be safe and have a chance at defending themselves, so Izuku's actions were sending warning bells off in their minds due to his actions, but also what they had seen in his eyes, since they were really good at reading Izuku's emotions and feelings via his eyes, unlike other people. The duo saw in Izuku's eyes that he had a large amount of sadness, but they also saw a large amount of anger that he was trying really strong to hide, so they were quite concerned about what had happened between them separating at the park yesterday to the start of school today, because in the span of one night Izuku had somehow become so enraged and also so saddened. As they entered the building to a point that they were now out of the line of sight and view from anyone that was outside of the school, Izuku quickly turned towards them and spoke to them. "Sorry, things have become complex with my guardians, but I should return to normal after a day or so," Izuku told them, but even Izuku's voice sounded tense and brought, so they just nodded their heads and started to go about their day, but that didn't mean that the duo would let it go, because something was clearly wrong and they wanted to help Izuku. As the day went by, the duo was of course not surprised one bit when no one noticed that Izuku was off in almost every single action that he was doing, because everyone was just used to the emotionless or rather indifference of a mask that Izuku wore, so they didn't really pay close attention any other day to compare his actions towards today's, but the duo knew he was really off. Of course, the duo didn't push Izuku directly to speak about what had happened, but they were without a doubt wearing Izuku's barriers down in their actions throughout the day, as Izuku felt himself starting to crack under the pressure of his emotions and the attempts that weren't subtle at all on their parts. Now you may wonder what the duo was doing to wear Izuku down, you may ask. Well, they were accomplishing this by hugging Izuku at completely random times and telling him that it was going to be okay, or randomly giving him note cards with happy messages or jokes that were intended to make him laugh at them. Honestly, Izuku was glad to have them as friends, because by the end of the day he was downright close to a breakdown, and it wasn't due to their actions, no, it was from all of the overwhelming emotions inside of him due to the events from last night as they plagued his mind. This meant that by the time that all three of them had made it to the park, Izuku ended up completely broken, as he could no longer hold everything inside, as he ended up dropping down to the ground at the park and had pulled his knees up to his chest as he started to sob. The mask of indifference that he had always held up even in front of them was completely shattered now, and the duo was now seeing the unfiltered version of Izuku Midoriya as he broke in front of them. Both Ozzy and Zara quickly dropped down to the ground right next to Izuku and just pulled him into a group hug as strong as they could, since Izuku's sudden drop had surprised them and was unexpected even to them. They could only sit with Izuku as they didn't really know what to do in situations like this but to just try and calm their friend down as they didn't know the actual reason for Izuku's breakdown, so they didn't know what to directly fix or try to fix, but they wished so much that they did know what it was. Sadly, for them, they were afraid that if they tried to push Izuku right now for the actual reason why he was holding so much sadness and anger, then he may end up closing himself off again, and they didn't want that to happen since they knew he needed to get whatever it was out of his system right now and allow himself to express his emotions without hiding them. After about 10 minutes of calming Izuku down, they were able to move him and themselves over to their favorite spot in the park. This spot was right under a giant tree, or rather giant in their eyes due to how young and short they were, but this tree provided them a large amount of shade and had a natural platform somehow carved into the trunk where they could just rest right up against it without rubbing against too much bark. It was as if someone had shaped the tree as it grew to have a nice curved spot in the bottom portion of the trunk, but they didn't really care how it happened as it became their favorite spot regardless. Anyway, as they sat there under the tree, 𝗳𝗓𝗄 spoke up and asked if Izuku was willing to talk to them about what was wrong and had him so upset, but then they felt Izuku tense up a bit under their grasp, which neither of them liked the fact that they were making him uncomfortable. Izuku was also silent for a bit and 𝗳𝗓𝗄 was about to tell him that they were going to drop it, but he didn't have time to say anything as Izuku spoke up first as he told them that he had wished he could be free but never would since no one could save him. It was as if the entire world came to a standstill when the two of them heard this from Izuku, and suddenly as Izuku realized what he had said, his eyes widened at the realization that he had said such a thing. He quickly told them both that they should forget what he had said as he pleased with them with such raw emotions in his voice that made them agree with his request, but Izuku knew that they would not forget what he had said as it was far too shocking. However, in Izuku's mind, even with them being the children of the top pro hero families, he doubted anyone would believe such a statement out of their mouths, as it could be taken as just a child throwing a fit, and in some people's eyes it was Izuku just throwing a fit, but again he was a captive of a high-level villain organization, so Izuku had a right to throw fits about his situation since it wasn't a normal family. However, to everyone unknowing, he was a part of a perfect set of relatives that had taken him in once his parents had died in Japan, so there was nothing to look into as nothing appeared to be wrong. Unknown to Izuku though, he held a very special place in the hearts of the duo, and they were not going to let what Izuku said slide by without them digging into it, though they both were realistic as they knew they were children and couldn't do much. They also knew if they took it to their families that they couldn't do anything either, since it would be a second-hand statement from them which their parents would need confirmation from Izuku about his true meaning, and they knew right now there was likely no way that Izuku would confirm anything for anyone. There was the fact that he still resisted their requests to go to their homes and be introduced to their parents, and the fact that he refused to ever talk about what went on at his so-called home, which they knew was most likely not a good place for Izuku, but right now they couldn't help him. However, that didn't mean they couldn't do anything at all. Nope. Instead of doing nothing, they had started to make plans in their minds once Izuku left to return to his so-called home, on gathering evidence about Izuku's living arrangements and those that were in Izuku's life, like the driver of the family that Izuku seemed so on guard about, and they realized this would likely take them a long time as they knew to be careful due to the stories their parents told them about cases, so they weren't dumb, but there was one thing that they wouldn't do, and that was left Izuku feeling like he was alone, since they were going to be there for him no matter what.